We have hours to continue to be excited, folks. Hours. We now come to the motion. In the name of the Leader of the Opposition on family businesses. The Speaker has not selected the amendment, and I call Mel Stride to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move the motion on the order paper. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the last general election, the party opposite, now the government, told us that they aspired to become the natural party of business. The natural party of business. An absurd suggestion, given what has happened over the last 7 short months. As absurd, perhaps, as the business secretary claiming to be a qualified lawyer. Or as absurd, perhaps, as the Attorney General claiming to be a patriotic lawyer. Or absurd, perhaps, as the Prime Minister claiming to be anything other than a lawyer. The economy, Madam Deputy Speaker, has tanked. Inflation recently spiked at 3%. It is to go still further higher. It was 2% on the day of the general election, a legacy that we bequeath to the party opposite. Borrowing is up, substantially up, on the forecasts the OBR produced at the last budget. And growth has been killed stone dead. Growth that the Bank of England tells us will grow, an economy that will grow at half the rate that it had originally suggested. It is no wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, that all the business confidence surveys show confidence crashing through the floor as a result of what this government is doing. Businesses laying off jobs, businesses putting up prices, businesses reducing investment, businesses sometimes having to put themselves up for sale or, even worse, going under. I will give way to the honourable lady. Right.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Just on that specific point, a local businessman actually wrote to me and he said he'd spent over 50 years building his engineering business from the ground up, only to now face the possibility that his life's work could be dismantled due to the unfair tax burden. Does my right honourable friend agree with me? Why on earth would anybody want to start a business in the current climate that's been created by the benches opposite?
Well, lady is absolutely right, and we see it there in these surveys to which I refer. Business confidence at virtually an all-time low. And of course, before this whirlwind of disaster visited us, Madam Deputy Speaker, we had a calmer time during the general election. A Labour Party on best behaviour with business. A Labour Party with a manifesto that sought to reassure business, indeed explicitly ruled out the possibility of an increase in national insurance. A Labour Party that was on the prawn cocktail circuit, that was countenancing canapes and calm. The breathy seduction of the previous Shadow Chancellor. The Business Secretary hopping about in the background dispensing free legal advice to whoever cared to listen. With Labour, Madam Deputy Speaker, everything seemed possible. Business would be safe in their tender hands, but it wasn't. Trust was destroyed, the wrong decisions were taken. And why? Because the front bench opposite has not a jot of real-world business experience sitting there at all. In fact, around the cabinet table, less than half of those present have had any experience in the private sector whatsoever. Far from being the natural party of business, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the most anti-business government in modern political history. Madam Deputy Speaker, the British Chamber of Commerce, in its surveys, shows that tax is now the #1 concern of businesses. The Federation of Small Businesses says that in the last quarter of last year, business confidence hit the lowest level ever recorded in their surveys, save for the pandemic. It is almost as if just about the only way that small businesses are being created today is due to the shrinkage of larger ones. Firms crushed by the wrong policies. Take national insurance. This measure has not even commenced, as we know. It comes in April, and yet it is already driving down employment. It is already driving up prices and inflation. It is a ticking tax time bomb waiting to go off in early April. It affects the lowest paid the hardest. Those on part-time work will bear the brunt of this measure. Those sectors that are labour-intensive. Hospitality in a moment. Hospitality UK found that 750,000 more jobs will be subject to national insurance as a direct effect of this government's plans. And Young's the brewer, an extra 20 pence on the price of a pint. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Honourable gentleman giving way, and I'm pleased that he's expressed concern for people who are on lower wages, and in that case I hope he will welcome from this dispatch box the decision of this Labour government to increase the living wage by 6.7% from April this year.
Centre of the party that increased the personal allowance and doubled it between 2010 and the present day, taking millions of people out of tax altogether, and the party that brought in the national living wage. We have done a great deal to support, particularly the lowest paid in our society. When it comes to... I will give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the Shadow Chancellor. Isn't the point here, it's the culmination of all the changes the Labour government have been put in. This government has indeed raised national insurance and may need to do so in the future. But the key point is, it's all these ramifications, the living wage change, the cuts in the business rate relief, the red tape being put in with the Employment Rights Bill and the national insurance contributions all going up. It's that toxic concoction that's going to kill off growth that's a problem we have. Does he agree?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and it is not as if, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the government was not warned about these issues. The OBR in its reports makes it extremely clear that whilst, for example, 25 billion is the headline figure to be raised through the national insurance contribution changes, the actual net is far less than that because of the behavioural impacts that necessarily follow when you tax jobs. You don't need to have spent a decade, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the Bank of England to know that. National insurance increases lead to fewer jobs, lower wages, higher prices. And this government, of course, piling on the regulation with its Employment Rights Bill. And we know that that increases the risk of employing people at a time when the employment market itself is softening, I will in a moment, and putting an end to flexible working practices, which benefit many businesses, but also suit many of the people that benefit from them, particularly younger people and those who are more elderly. Given this, it is astonishing that this Chancellor has launched a tax raid on family businesses, and I give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do thank the Shadow Chancellor for giving way. Could he spell out the specific rights in the Employment Rights Bill that he believes and his party believes should not be afforded to working people in this country?
For example, he asked a very fair question. To be put in a situation where employers will be fearful of taking on new hires because of the consequences that may follow, to have a situation where trade unions are going to be advantaged in the way that the bill suggests, the trade union paymasters that support perhaps the honourable gentleman, but certainly many of his colleagues, the minimum service standards legislation that we brought in, that this bill, as I understand it, will overturn. None of these things are going to be good for jobs. They're not going to be good for people searching for employment. They're not going to be good for businesses, and they're not going to be good for the UK economy. I'll give way one more time.
I'll happily declare an interest, Madam Deputy Speaker, as a member of many proud trade unions, and my declaration is up to date and free for all to see. And I very much enjoyed the Shadow Chancellor's answer to my question, but perhaps I could pose it again, taking a lesson from his own lead, and he might want to answer it this time. What are the specific rights in the Employment Rights Bill that he and his party oppose? It's in the motion to say the Employment Rights Bill should be stopped. So what are the rights in that bill that he opposes working people having?
Already answered, as he knows. Actually, to paraphrase the leader of his own party, I've already answered the honourable gentleman's questions. But I note his serial offence of being a member of several trade unions at the moment. But good of him to have disclosed that. Madam Deputy Speaker, the changes to business property relief are going to see the break-up of many family firms. Now, the government will say, of course, that it will only have an impact on the wealthiest estates because there is the £1 million threshold. But how many of those companies are going to have that cash or availability to that money to settle those particular liabilities? And the value, of course, within many businesses lies in their assets. And liquidating those assets to pay those kind of liabilities, given that those assets are often instrumental to the effective working of that firm, is an absurdity. And we also know that changes will damage businesses' ability to borrow against assets where there is a sword of Damocles hanging over their head by way of a potential future inheritance tax liability. Madam Deputy Speaker, research by CBI Economics for Family Business UK suggests that this policy may actually not even raise any money. Of those firms that are going to be impacted, the average company, those companies said that on average they would be investing 17% less in their business as a consequence of this measure. And in fact, 15% of those businesses that would be impacted said that they would sell their business altogether. The rules, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, are going to be complex. There will be plenty of red tape. There will be legal advice to be taken from solicitors, yes, real ones. There will be some people that will pay through dividends on which they will already have been taxed. So they will be taxed twice. Tax on tax, as we know, is the Labour Party way. And Madam Deputy Speaker, William Lees-Jones of J.W. Lees, the long-established family brewery and pub operator in the North West, has said that the family business tax would, quote, inevitably reduce future investment in the company. But he goes on to say something else that is important, and I quote, it would also place our business at a considerable disadvantage to our competitors who tend to be listed or owned by private equity, sometimes overseas. And so it is that British institutions, which in some cases have been in the same family for decades or indeed even centuries, may end up shutting down or being forced to sell to foreign buyers as a result of this single reckless policy. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. What Labour do not seem to understand is that every business starts with an idea, with a hope, with a dream. The individual then puts their whole heart, their soul, and every working hour they have into building that business, often as a whole family endeavour over many generations. It is that, not just the economics and the jobs, which Labour are destroying.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and this is why the dearth of experience of entrepreneurship on the benches opposite really shows. And we see this not just with BPR, but agricultural property relief as well, the family farm being broken up. Years and generations of people struggling, working hard, whatever the weather, to grow those businesses, to provide the food that we need, swept asunder by a stroke of the Treasury's pen. And I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful again for him giving way. The Prime Minister was interviewed and said that the reason for doing this to farmers was to be able to give them the NHS that they might need. Only a week later, the £10 million fund that was there to support the mental health of farmers has been taken away. How does that stick in the throat of the farmers when they're told they're not a priority, food security is not a priority, and actually now they won't have the health service there in place, despite the tax that they're now going to ensue?
The treatment, Madam Deputy Speaker, of our farmers by this government has been utterly atrocious. Right before the last general election, the Shadow Secretary of State for DEFRA, now the Secretary of State for DEFRA, looked the NFU in the eye and told them that at least on the measure of inheritance tax, farmers had nothing to fear from a future Labour government. And yet the point that my honourable friend makes is absolutely telling. They cared nothing about any of them. Within a matter of months of coming into office, they had already brought in their agricultural property relief changes, to the detriment of thousands of hard-working farmers up and down our country. I give way to the honourable lady.
The right honourable member for giving way, and I'd like to ask him whether it was also the concern for the well-being of our farming communities and their mental health and the food security just discussed by members on those benches, whether that was also a concern of yours when the Conservative government over the 14 years also sold our farmers down the river with dodgy trade deals with Australia and New Zealand. Was that your concern then?
No, not at all.
Before the Shadow Chancellor responds, a concern of yours would mean the Chair. So let's start off today's business in good form. Shadow Chancellor.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think I should put on the record you have always been very pro-farmers, and it should not in any way should that ever be brought into question by anybody in this chamber. I am extremely proud of our record supporting farmers up and down the country, ever since I first came into this House, 2010, representing a highly rural constituency right in the middle of beautiful Devon. There are many schemes and much support and much money and financial support and so on that this government, when it was in office, should be very proud of. But we would... Yes, who would like to get... Yeah. Give way.
I thank him for giving way, and I thought I'd let him, make some progress in his speech. It seems odd to hear a speech from the Conservative Party about the economy without a mention of Liz Truss. And now, of course, we have trade deals mentioned on the benches opposite. So I'll ask him very directly, does he think that the policies of Liz Truss, but he can't hear because you're shouting, not you, madam, they are shouting.
Intervention should be very short. Come to a conclusion quickly.
I'll ask him, does he think the policies of Liz Truss were good for business investment and confidence in the economy?
Well, the honourable gentleman may or may not be aware that at the time of the mini-budget, I was the chair of the Treasury Select Committee. I had a lot to say about what was being proposed before it happened. I had a lot to say at the time that it happened, and I've had a lot to say since then, and all that is a matter for the public record. If the honourable lady wants to intervene, I'm very, very happy to do so. But, Madam, or on that point, go on.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've been invited to make an intervention, so I'll just very quickly say that whilst the honourable gentleman was reasonably outspoken on the mini-budget, the same can't be said for his colleagues on the front bench.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've made the position extremely clear. And what is very clear is that we actually left the current government with an excellent inheritance. Inasmuch as... where's it all gone now? Where's it all gone? We left the party opposite with the fastest growing economy in the G7. We left the party opposite with a near record level of employment. We left the party opposite with a near-record low level of unemployment. We left the party opposite with 13 consecutive months of real wage growth. And we left the party opposite with inflation having come down, due to the Ukraine war, come down from over 11% in October 22 right down to 2% and bang on target on the day of the general election. That is a decent inheritance. It has taken the party opposite 7 short months to completely trash it. So we'll take no lectures from the party opposite. But we, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, would do things very differently. And the reason we would be doing things differently is we recognise that small businesses, family businesses, are the backbone of our economy. They are the life and fire of our economy. But there is no life or fire in the Chancellor, just tragic mistakes and miscalculations. The sugar rush of borrowing and spending that we saw in the last budget, further bloating the size of the state, forcing taxes ever upwards. The failure to grasp the nettle of productivity, giving in to those trade union paymasters, above inflationary wage settlements with no strings attached whatsoever, and absolutely nothing to say from the party opposite on the issue of welfare. The budget for which has been ballooning out of control. When we were in government, Madam Deputy Speaker, when we were in, I will in a moment, we reduced the welfare budget on my watch by £5 billion, and the OBR scored over 400,000 fewer people going on to long-term sickness and disability benefits as a result of the reforms that we brought in. But there was more to be delivered. We went into the last election with a clear plan to save a further £12 billion every year as a result of our welfare reforms. But where has the zeal for welfare reform gone from the government opposite? It's evaporated entirely. In fact, it was never there. And I will just simply say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that if this government has the backbone to come forward with some serious proposals to deal with the welfare budget, such that on March the 26th the Chancellor can come to that dispatch box in this House and say that she is unwinding those national insurance increases, then the opposition will support her. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I noticed that the motion today is on family businesses, Madam Deputy Speaker, but 96% of them are either ones with no employees or a very small number, unaffected, if not helped by the doubling of the employment allowance. Only 4% of family businesses have claimed BPR, most of them unaffected. And the Shadow Chancellor can't name a single proposal in the Employment Rights Bill. Will he apologise to family businesses for the total irrelevance of his complaints today to the theme that we're talking?
I think the honourable gentleman, with great respect, should get out a bit more and speak to some of those businesses. Madam Deputy Speaker, politics is about priorities. And for all their talk of being the natural party of business, the government is instead simply reaching for the socialist comfort blanket of tax, spend, borrow and regulate. It hasn't worked before. It isn't working now. And it will never work. And is not the truth, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this government is totally out of its depth, that businesses are reeling, and that we are all paying the price?
The question is as on the order paper, and I call the Minister, James Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and my thanks to the Shadow Chancellor, the Right Honourable Member for Central Devon, for opening today's debate. Madam Deputy Speaker, the opposition, in their motion today, have set out a list of objections they have to decisions the government has taken, or, in the case of the measurements around pints, decisions that shadow ministers seem to have entirely imagined. While shadow ministers may be able to list their objections, they are unable to take responsibility for the damage to our economy that they in government were responsible for. And crucially, Madam Deputy Speaker, they are unable to offer any credible alternative. Today's motion makes clearer than ever that the Conservatives have no vision, no ideas and no plan to deliver the change that our country needs. In contrast, Labour is the party with a plan for change. A plan to restore economic stability, boost investment and drive growth across the UK to put more money in people's pockets. We know that it is government's responsibility to provide stability, security, fiscal responsibility and to get unnecessary regulation out of the way when it stands in the way of growth. It is businesses, large and small, including family businesses and their workforces, who will create jobs and wealth and be the engines of growth in the economy. We know that pubs, shops, traders and services across the country not only play an important role in all our lives, but also drive economic growth. Those businesses and their workforces are the backbone of our economy, and they need a government who will take the right decisions, even when they are difficult, in the national interest to support our security and prosperity. And so, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me start by briefly reminding the Conservative members opposite of the context in which those decisions have been made. That context is, of course, the inheritance that this country faced after 14 years of the party opposite being in power. I'll give way.
In 2010, this government, the then government, had to borrow £158 billion. Of course, fast forward another decade, we had something called the pandemic, where we had to borrow £400 billion. So on the top of that, collectively, that's a great big difficulty to be dealing with. Now, I sat in this chamber 5 years ago, when the pandemic happened, listening to all the interventions asking for more spending of money. This is the problem that the Conservative government have dealt with. Does he not agree?
The honourable gentleman said we had something called the pandemic. We also had a Prime Minister called Liz Truss, and that had a pretty big impact on our economy. And I know the Shadow Chancellor is distancing himself from it. I would welcome an intervention from his colleagues if they would like to leap to Liz Truss's defence. I'll give way. No, they're not seeking to intervene on me. Funny that, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's no intention to intervene on me there. Perhaps in closing, one of the other shadow ministers can refer to Liz Truss's record and defend that. Yes, Liz Truss's record.
So the way I see it, the problem is Liz Truss with her budget was she didn't set out her workings. The problem with Rachel Reeves's one is she did, and the country and the world doesn't believe it. That is far more detrimental to the situation we find ourselves in because she can't get out of that problem. That is the difference between Liz Truss and Rachel Reeves.
Wow, Madam Deputy Speaker. I should let the honourable gentleman intervene more often if he's going to... If he's going to say that the only problem with Liz Truss is that she didn't set out her workings, I think the problem was rather more fundamental than that, as people across this country will attest. But frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is no wonder that members opposite want to bury their heads in the sand and try and pretend the last 14 years did not happen. It was 14 years of mismanagement and decline, along with jolts of disaster, digging ever deeper holes in our public services and our economic resilience. It was their decisions that led to their resounding electoral loss last year, and it was their record in office that made the difficult decisions that we had to face on entering government necessary. I'll give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and he's in his usual courteous way handling this debate. But can I take him back to something that he said in his remarks, which were the hospitality businesses and pubs deliver economic growth? Can I say to him that there is a small pub chain in my constituency that are having to find a third of their total turnover because of the actions of this government, meaning that they may have to close a venue which supports a small village in my constituency? Is that the economic growth that he thinks that he's delivering?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and with regards to the changes around employer national insurance, which I assume is what he was referring to, I'll come to that in a few moments in my remarks. But let me be absolutely clear about the context here, Madam Deputy Speaker, which is that no responsible government could have let things carry on the way they were. Absolutely. That was simply not a tenable situation, and I think members of the opposite party know that. And that is why, at autumn budget, we took difficult but necessary decisions on welfare, spending and tax. And those decisions were vital steps towards restoring economic stability, fixing the public finances and supporting public finances. Now, as I said earlier, Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst members opposite have taken every opportunity to say they oppose these choices, they have yet to offer any solutions of their own. But difficult decisions were necessary, and so let me set out why we made some of the choices that we did. I'll give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Labour Party manifesto said that by the year 28-29, they would increase spending by £9.5 billion a year. Why then did the budget increase it by that year by £76 billion, 8 times more than the Labour manifesto said?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I'm sure the honourable member will know, upon entering government and speaking to Treasury officials about the state of the public finances, we uncovered a £22 billion black hole, which was known to shadow ministers, well, ministers at the time, but the OBR was not informed of that. I'll give way one more time.
The Minister might have noticed that there is a bigger gap between £9.5 billion and £76 billion than £22 billion. His answer was clearly ridiculous. The reason that we're talking about these kinds of tax rises is not because of the £22 billion fictional black hole, but because of the decision to increase spending by 8 times more than the Labour Party promised at the election. Will he accept that or not?
Yeah. So the honourable member's comments are clearly ridiculous. If he thinks the £22 billion black hole was fictional, it has a real-term consequences in terms of the pressure. I'm going to make some progress. I've been very generous in giving way to the honourable gentleman, but he will know that his colleagues on his benches who are in government were aware of the in-year spending pressures, and they chose not to share it with the Office of Budget Responsibility and thereby not share it with the British people. That is the truth of what we inherited, and that is why we had to take difficult decisions. Now, I'm going to turn to some of those difficult decisions which we had to take in the budget last year, because the opposition motion refers to the decisions we had taken on business property relief. Now, I assure him that the decision we took on this relief and on agricultural property relief were not taken lightly. The government recognises the role that these reliefs play, particularly in supporting small farms and family businesses, and that is why we chose to maintain these reliefs rather than abolishing them, meaning they maintain very significant levels of relief from inheritance tax beyond what is available to others. Indeed, the reliefs will remain more generous than the last time they were changed. The changes we are making mean that agricultural and business property reliefs will be better targeted and fairer. Madam Deputy Speaker, according to the most recent data from HMRC, 40% of agricultural property relief benefits the top 7% of estates making claim. It is a similar picture for business property relief, where more than 50% of business property relief is claimed by just 4% of estates making claims. These data bear out the fact that the benefit of the existing 100% relief on business and agricultural assets has become heavily skewed towards the wealthiest estates. It is neither fair nor sustainable to maintain such a large tax break for such a small number of the wealthiest claimants, particularly in light of the wider pressures on the public finances. And that is why we are changing how we target agricultural property relief and business property relief from April next year. Individuals will still benefit from the 100% relief for the first £1 million of combined business and agricultural assets. On top of this amount, there will be 50% relief, which means that inheritance tax will be paid at a reduced effective rate of up to 20% rather than the standard 40%. And of course, this sits on top of the other spousal exemption and nil rate bands which apply more widely within the inheritance tax system.
Kilnside Farm in my constituency, run by Bob Milton, is only 36 acres in total, which is a tiny farm, yet is going to be subject to these new taxes. So how can he say that only 4% are going to be affected? Even the smallest farms in my constituency are going to be hit by this.
Well, just to correct the honourable gentleman, I didn't say that only 4% were going to be affected. We've set out that around up to 520 estates claiming agricultural property relief, including those that also claim agricultural business property relief, expect to be affected in 26-27. That means that around 3/4 of estates will be unaffected and will not pay any more inheritance tax. All of the data on this has been set out in a letter from the Chancellor to the Treasury Select Committee, and if the honourable gentleman looks at that document, he'll see some of the stats that I'm referring to. I'll give way.
Of those 500 or so that you've just explained will be the ones that have to pay this inheritance tax, do you have any idea what the number of those are small businesses compared to the large estates that you're seeking to challenge in this legislation?
The data that I referred to is based on claims data, and this is an important point which comes up frequently when we have debates around agricultural property relief and business property relief, because if one were to consider assets that are owned by farmers or by other business owners, the actual value of the asset doesn't give you a guide to what claim might be made against inheritance tax, because that will depend on the ownership structure, on debt that might be owned, on what inheritances have happened earlier in people's lives, and so on. So the only data which can give you an indication about what impact these changes will be having from April 2026 is the claims data. Now, the data that I referred to earlier and that I referred to in response to the honourable gentleman is the claims data that HMRC has, real claims data. That is the data on which we made decisions around this policy, and that is the data which informs some of the Chancellor's statistics in her response to the Treasury Select Committee, which the honourable lady may like to consult. I'll give way.
I thank the honourable man for giving way. In Northern Ireland, the Agriculture Department has indicated that almost half the farms will be impacted by the inheritance tax. 75% of all dairy farms will be impacted by the inheritance tax. When will he start to speak with and listen to industry leaders? Because quite frankly, the meeting last week was an outrage, and he needs to sit and listen to industry leaders who know the industry and who are speaking on behalf of real farmers on the ground who are going to be impacted by this inheritance tax.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the honourable lady referred to meetings that I held last week with representatives both of UK-wide organisations and indeed those that represent other nations within the UK. And I think there is a difference between listening to people and having to agree, because sometimes we listen and we disagree. Sometimes we listen and we disagree, and that is the situation that we found ourselves in after that meeting, where we listen to concerns but we have a different approach. And I've been setting out today through this debate exactly why we've taken the decisions that we have. I'll give way.
For giving way. I recently did a survey of all the farms in my constituency of South Devon, And 85% of the people who responded to that survey said that they were going to be affected by this inheritance tax, mainly because of the cost of land in South Devon. Practically all farms are going to be subject to this. So when will the government listen to this evidence that we are collecting from our farmers, that your assessment that only 25% of farms are going to be affected is actually not correct?
Well, thank you, Honourable Lady, for her intervention. But I think it is important to emphasise that the correct data to work out the impact that these changes will have is the claims data. And the claims data is what is available to HMRC, and that is the basis on which we have established how many farms, how many assets, how many estates are likely to be affected by the changes. I will take one more intervention from the Honourable Lady.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. I think the point that, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we're trying to make is that by only looking at one data set, the challenge here is that the Minister is not looking at the big picture. We've spoken a lot about farmers, but the business property relief is about the whole of the business community. And so will he not go away and have another look at this and take account of all the evidence that hopefully he's been listening to since the announcement of this reckless policy?
Just for members who haven't understood etiquette, you can't just wander into a debate when someone's on their feet and then try and intervene. You need to take part in the whole debate. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll return to the point that I've made several times today, which is that the way to understand how a policy in relation to agricultural property relief and business property relief will work is to look at actual claims data, because that is how to understand the claims as they relate to individual estates. The overall value of farms or the overall value of businesses do not tell you exactly what the estate value is going to be through an individual claim, and that is the correct way to approach it. I'm going to make some progress because I've given way many times on this particular section of the speech, and I have plenty more to get through. I'm sure there are other members who would like to contribute in this speech. Madam Deputy Speaker, depending on people's individual circumstances, a couple will be able to pass on up to £3 million to their children or grandchildren free of any inheritance tax at all. If owners pass on their assets more than 7 years before death, then no inheritance tax will be due either, and where any payment is due, this can be paid over 10 years interest-free in most circumstances. This stands as a benefit that is not seen anywhere else in the inheritance tax system. Now, I recognise, Madam Deputy Speaker, as evidenced today, that the reforms to inheritance tax generate strong views. But reform of these views is necessary given the fiscal challenge which confronts us, and this is a fair approach that helps put the public finances back on a sustainable footing. I'm going to make some progress. I'm going to move on, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may, to some other elements of the motion which is put before us today around the changes to employer national insurance contributions, which is another of the difficult decisions we had to take about the budget. Now, I recognise that this change will have impacts, but asking employers to contribute more is the fairest way to restore fiscal stability and to provide essential services like our NHS with the resources they desperately need. The rate of employer national insurance will increase from 13.8% to 15%, whilst the per-employee threshold at which employers start to pay national insurance, known as the secondary threshold, will be reduced to £5,000. At the same time, we firmly recognise the importance of small businesses, and we will protect the smallest businesses and charities by more than doubling the employment allowance to £10,500. This means that next year, 865,000 employers will pay no national insurance contributions at all. More than half of employers will see no change or gain overall from this package. And employers will be able to employ up to 4 full-time workers on the national living wage and pay no employer national insurance contributions. Employers will, of course, also be able to benefit from other employer national insurance contributions reliefs, including hiring under 21s and under 25 apprentices where eligible. These changes broadly return national insurance contribution revenues as a proportion of GDP to the level they were before the previous government's cuts to employee and self-employed national insurance, but they do so in a way that does not result in higher taxes on people's payslips. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the motion, the opposition also referred to business rates. We want to see local shops and high streets thriving again, which means we must act to support the businesses behind them who have had to contend with changing consumer habits and significant economic headwinds in recent years. Whilst online shopping is convenient and offers great variety, the high street brings people together, and hospitality businesses have played a key role in bringing people into town centres. However, at present, the business rates burden falls more heavily on property-intensive sectors, which is why business rates need rebalancing. From 2026-27, we therefore intend to introduce permanently lower tax rates for high street retail, hospitality and leisure properties with rateable values below £500,000. This will benefit over 280,000 properties. At the same time, to make this tax cut sustainable, we will apply a higher rate on properties with a rateable value of £500,000 and above. That group represents less than 1% of all properties, but covers the majority of large distribution warehouses, including those used by online giants, helping to level the playing field for high street businesses. I'll give way.
He and other ministers have constantly come back to this point about, they talk about the higher rateable value commercial premises and say, which includes distribution centres for online giants. What proportion of the total is distribution centres for online giants?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and data is being set up by the Valuation Office Agency, which should give him some of the details which he's requesting on that. I'm happy to write to him with the details which are available. But the point is, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that in order to be able to sustainably fund a permanent cut for retail, hospitality and leisure properties below £500,000, we have to ensure that it is paid for, and that is why we are seeking to increase the rate on those properties with a rateable value of £500,000 or more to ensure it is sustainably funded. And of course, that will come in from April 2026. So yes.
Very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. He's talking about the importance of sustainable funding, and I completely agree with him. And what is fascinating is that the last government had a business rate relief system, which was a good one, but then had nothing in the budget at all, so they plan to cancel it entirely. And that is why we are in the situation we are now.
Temporary. Well, I thank my honourable friend very much for his intervention, and he's absolutely right to point out that under the previous government there was a series of cliff edges and one-year extensions which provided no stability whatever to businesses trying to plan around investment, hiring or expansion decisions. And so that is why we have decided to extend the relief that the previous government had set due to end in April 2025 for one further year before introducing permanently lower rates from April 2026.
Thank you. The Minister is talking about planning, and I should declare an interest as a farmer's wife, but he talks about the 500 farmers that will be affected, but of course none of us know who is going to die next year. We cannot know that. So while 500 farmers will be affected, many more might be the ones that die and might be affected. This is the source of the discrepancy between his figure of how many he thinks are going to definitely be affected, i.e. how many he predicts will die, and the actual number of people who may be affected and cannot plan their businesses accordingly because they simply don't know. He argues they can put their assets down a generation, but no one knows if there'll be a car accident and the younger generation is killed. He's simply taxing tragedy.
Well, I think I was following the honourable lady's point, which was to say that clearly no one knows in many cases when inheritance tax will be due because people can't predict what the sad events that may happen in their lives. But I think it is a clear point that in trying to work out what the impact of changes to tax policy is going to be, the best source of data is to look at the actual claims data for those reliefs in the past. And that is exactly what we have done. I'm not going to give way, I'm going to finish my point. We have looked at the data from HMRC about actual claims under agricultural property relief and business property relief, and that is what determines the data which I set out around up to 520 estates being affected in 26-27. Now I'm going to return to business 2, and I'll give one more time.
My point was, yes, he may be correct that 520 estates will be affected, but others who may be affected will need to plan their business and plan their lives accordingly. And that is why so many more people are affected by his announcement than simply those who die next year or the year after.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I return to my point that 3/4 of estates claiming agricultural property relief, or those claiming agricultural property relief and business property relief, will not pay any more inheritance tax in 26-27 as a result of these changes. So in terms of the extra inheritance tax liability, which is what the data about claims points toward, the data is very clear that the majority of estates will not be affected. And as I mentioned to several of her colleagues on the other side of the House, this data is set out in quite some detail in the letter the Chancellor wrote to the Treasury Select Committee, and perhaps if she has a look at the data in that, it might answer some of the questions which she's posing. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, to briefly finish my comments in relation to national insurance contributions, sorry, I've moved on, haven't I? business rates. To briefly finish my comments in relation to business rates, I was thanking my honourable friend for his intervention, which pointed out what we inherited from the previous government, and that was a situation where the relief for retail, hospitality and leisure was chopping and changing year to year, and indeed from April this year there was going to be a cliff edge where it went away entirely. There was going to be no relief at all after April this year, according to the plans which we inherited from the government previously. And so we decided to extend that relief at a fiscally responsible level for a further year ahead of our permanent reforms coming in. Now, whilst we're on the subject of hospitality, Madam Deputy Speaker, let me also address the frankly absurd notion in the opposition's motion, which I don't believe the Shadow Chancellor mentioned in his comments, that the pint is under threat. The pint is part of our nation. We do not need a new law to protect the pint any more than we need a new law to say the sun must rise in the morning. I wonder, frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, whether the members opposite who drafted that part of the motion may have been close to a number of pints at the point at which they did so. But in any case, I am proud to reject the insinuation in their motion and to put on record, if it needs to be said, that pints are at the heart of our nation and under Labour they will stay that way. Someone to give way? No? Yes.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I note that the government continually talks about how the Chancellor has shaved 1 penny off a pint, but whenever I talk to publicans in my constituency, many of who quote, they're having to find an extra £2,000 per month of additional cost as a result of the government's budget. Does he accept that a penny off a pint is futile if there are no pubs left to drink in?
What I accept, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said earlier, is that our difficult decision around employer national insurance contributions will have impacts to different businesses across the country. But what I also think he should welcome, and I know that businesses will welcome across the country, is the extra support we have provided through draft relief to support those pubs to succeed. And that is an essential part not just of our economic activity across the country, but also the social lives that we all enjoy, enjoying pints, as I know matters very much to members on the front bench opposite. Madam Deputy Speaker, to try and make some progress, because there was quite a lot to cover in the opposition's motion, in terms of employment, their motion also sought to undermine the Employment Rights Bill, so let me directly address those points. This bill, the Employment Rights Bill, is the first phase in delivering our plan to make work pay, supporting employers, workers and unions to get Britain moving forward to bring greater predictability to the lives of working people. Whilst I recognise that the flexibility offered by zero-hours contracts, zero-hours arrangements and low-hours contracts can benefit both workers and employers, without proper safeguards, the flexibility can be one-sided, and it is far too often the workers who end up bearing all of the financial risk. So that is why we have committed to ending this one-sided flexibility to ensure that all jobs provide a baseline of security so that workers can better plan their lives and their finances. This includes ending exploitative zero-hours contracts. We will deliver this commitment through 2 measures. First, a right to guaranteed hours, where the number of hours offered reflects the hours worked by the worker during a reference period. And second, new rights to offer reasonable notice of shifts with proportionate payment for shifts that are cancelled, moved or curtailed at short notice. Madam Deputy Speaker, to try and draw this to a close, so that I'm getting the... They might not want to hear it, Madam Deputy Speaker, but out of respect to yourself, I will bring this to a close. Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, the motion that we have been debating today exposed the Conservative Party that is happy to object to the difficult decisions we have taken, but totally unable to offer an alternative plan of their own. Today's debate has also allowed me to set out, on behalf of the government, how we are moving fast to take the sometimes difficult but necessary decisions to deliver our plan for change. We are taking the right decisions to fix our public finances, to restore stability and fiscal responsibility, and to make sure both businesses and their employees can work productively and securely to drive economic growth. The changes we have begun making are essential for economic growth, and so we reject the opposition's motion. We are determined to move further and faster to make people across the UK more secure and better off.
Right. I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm delighted to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrats about the importance of family businesses, because family businesses are so important and make a distinct contribution to our economy and to their local communities. Family businesses are synonymous with quality, trust and reliability. Family businesses have a strong sense of stewardship of their craft, of their capital and their customer base. And family businesses, by their very nature, have the goal of nurturing their business to pass through to the next generation, and as a result have a vested interest in long-term decisions, the stability of the economy and building a resilient community. Where family businesses are located on high streets, they are often the anchor store, bringing back loyal customers time and time again. And family businesses are present in every part of the UK. Indeed, they are often the largest employer in a region and often the largest philanthropic organisation in those communities too. But in tabling their motion today, Madam Deputy Speaker, the official opposition don't seek to acknowledge or accept the damage that they have done to family businesses over the years.
It's because we're not in government. It's about the government. The government's over there. Yeah,
Madam Deputy Speaker, if the official opposition are patient, they will realise I will not pull my punches when addressing the government. But it is an opposition day debate. So let me continue to outline the litany of mistakes that have occurred over the years. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Conservatives scrapped the industrial strategy, which was the bedrock of long-term planning. They failed to reform the broken business rate system, which has hammered family businesses on the high street. They have starved family businesses of seasonal workforces that many of them need. Their botched Brexit deal has deprived many family businesses of access to European markets, raising trade barriers for imports and exports, and wrapped them up in reams of red tape. They have wreaked havoc with their mini-budget, making access to finance too expensive for many, and they failed to address the soaring energy costs and the broken energy market, which has resulted in many small family businesses suffering from extortionate energy contracts and being frozen out of the best deals. And that is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is disappointing to see that the Labour government is making some of the same mistakes. The national insurance contributions rise is unnecessary. The government could have raised that £10 billion through other fairer means, taxes on big corporations that have raised billions, and using that money to put public services back on their feet. Madam Deputy Speaker, the business rates proposals will be incredibly damaging for small businesses on our high streets. And I've invited ministers on a number of occasions in this House to look at the House of Commons research that we have commissioned that shows that chains will continue to be subsidised by small independents. And of course there are the changes to APR and BPR, which raise a relatively small amount of money for the Treasury, but could be devastating to many small family businesses across the UK. Family Business UK, who I met this morning, are urging the government to run their own impact assessment. Now, Family Business UK are now conducting their own impact assessment in partnership with the NFU, and they intend to speak to more than 3,000 family businesses to ask about the impact that these measures may have. So can I invite the Minister either to intervene on me now or to say in his responding comments at the end of the debate whether or not the Minister or his government will meet with Family Business UK to discuss the findings of their survey once it is complete. We shouldn't just think of family businesses as units for tax revenue. Family businesses are different. Family farms rightly grab the public's imagination, but there's more than that. If I think about my own constituency in St Albans, I can think of many. Hedges Farm is much loved. It is a family-run, award-winning farm shop in St Albans, and their delicious meat is often on the menu of our award-winning restaurants. Waterers Tailors is run by two generations of the Massey family, providing bespoke, high-quality tailoring and some especially fancy men's jackets. Burston's Garden Centre is a long-established family business with a lovely restaurant and a fantastic place for a day out. We have beauty companies, building merchants and EV charger stalls, all of which are family businesses. And one of my favourite pubs too, The Boot, handed down from Will to his son, Sean. But on the subject of pubs, Madam Deputy Speaker, what on earth is this absurd idea in the Opposition Day motion that the Product Regulation and Metrology Bill will somehow put the British pint under threat? The pint is well and truly safe, and the pint is enshrined in law. Madam Deputy Speaker, the pint is well and truly safe, something that I'm sure this entire House wants to hear. The pint is enshrined in law in the Weights and Measures Act. So this scaremongering is just total nonsense. I would be tempted to call it a load of old codswallop, but I wouldn't want to insult the makers of that very fine pale ale. I could instead accuse them of scraping the barrel. But let us just say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Conservatives' claim that the pint will be abolished is as fanciful as Labour's claim that punters will see a penny taken off the price of their pint. They won't. Frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, if the opposition think that they are standing up for pubs, they need to think again. And I say this not only as the MP for St Albans, where we have more pubs per square mile than anywhere else in Britain, but also, I'm proud to say, I was crowned last year as Pub Parliamentarian of the Year. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the last Conservative government, the last Conservative government proved, unfortunately, that they didn't know their firkin from their pin. They couldn't tell a kilderkin from a craft keg. And their defective attempt at introducing a draft beer relief ended up excluding the very small craft brewers they were claiming to help. When a former Conservative Prime Minister had the audacity to have a photo op with the casks he had mistakenly left out of the draft duty relief support scheme, it was the Liberal Democrats who worked with publicans and small brewers to force that correction. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, if the official opposition want to pretend to stand up for the great British pub, they will need to do their homework. They should get out and speak to the struggling pubs and hospitality businesses that they have ignored. Because if, Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Conservatives want to continue with their pint-sized politics, it will be the Liberal Democrats. It will be the Liberal Democrats who continue to have the official opposition well and truly over a barrel. Now, jokes aside, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are changes in the Labour budget that are no laughing matter. The National Insurance contribution changes and the reduction in business rates relief will deliver a hammer blow to our pubs. They will have no choice but to put up prices for punters, and many more may be pushed to the brink. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will give way.
Thank you. Thank the Honourable Member for giving way. A joint survey by leading hospitality trade associations in Northern Ireland has revealed that 65% of hospitality businesses will reduce their employment levels, 55% will cancel planned investment, and 22% believe they will have to close their door. The same can be said of retail because of the extra threat around big business and online sales and the fact that they get away in the smoke around taxation. Does she agree with me that there will be tumbleweed going down our high streets rather than thriving high streets, as the Minister has indicated today?
I'm grateful to the member for raising those points. Our high streets are the beating heart of our communities all over the UK, and there is real concern that when the national insurance contribution changes and the reduction in the business rates relief kick in, that indeed our high streets will be absolutely hammered, and we may indeed see tumbleweed. And that matters for two reasons. One, because it means that there will be an impact on our local economies, but it could have a knock-on impact on people's confidence as well, because many people who have busy lives don't always get to follow the headlines about growth and inflation and interest rates and all the rest, but they do look to their high streets as the primary signal of whether or not the economy is working for them and whether it's working in their local area. Of course, when it comes to hospitality, it's not just the increase in the national insurance contribution rates that will impact hospitality, it's also the changes that will mean that many part-time workers won't be able to be recruited to work in those businesses as well, and that will impact particularly women, often people from ethnic minorities and young people as well, who often work in hospitality, often because it's their first job, often because it's hospitality that gives them the chance to work after something adverse has happened in their life. But hospitality, I think, is a sector that all of us in this House can say we support, and it's absolutely vital that we continue to support it. I will.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. She talks about businesses run by women. I've got a constituent who runs a nursery in Somerton in my constituency. She's been struggling to stay afloat now for some time after the issues from the Conservative government, but also the impact of the increased national insurance contributions. So this announcement in nursery provision could be the last straw for her business. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the government must urgently look at the impact that their measures are having on the early years sector?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that contribution. I absolutely agree. Many times in this House, members have debated the impact of the national insurance contribution rise, and some colleagues may remember that we Liberal Democrats tabled a number of amendments to exclude particular groups. Now, we're opposed to the national insurance contribution rise full stop, and we put forward alternative ways in which the government could raise the revenue, but we said that if the government was intent on pursuing this particular measure, then there should be some organisations that should be exempted, and we pointed particularly to health and care providers, including social care providers, but we also talked about early years providers as well, universities, charities, hospices, and we've debated those many times, and we urge the government once again to look very closely at the impact of the national insurance contribution rise and to do that impact assessment that we all so desperately want to see.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I will.
I thank the honourable friend for giving way. In my constituency, I have a large employer with several sites who is now looking at automation because the impact of the national insurance contributions is going to add £250,000 to his bottom line. So he is actively looking at how he can make redundancies so that he can keep his business afloat. Would my honourable friend agree that this is not the way to improve the local economy and make people feel good about jobs and investment in the local economy?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for that contribution. I think there are many sectors and industries where actually automation can have some value alongside employing and training up the next generation, but I think it would be devastating to some other sectors if automation replaces the next generation. And that's, I think, that's very important, particularly in farming, but also if we think of hospitality, the very nature of hospitality is that it is hospitable. And I think the idea that we might go to the pub and be served by a vending machine isn't really someone's idea of a good night out. So I do agree with my honourable friend that automation, when put alongside investing in the next generation and investing in staff, can be a good thing, but as a replacement it can have devastating impacts on the future of sectors and on people's opportunities as well. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have rehearsed on a number of occasions the impact of the government's budget on small businesses, on family businesses across the land. We Liberal Democrats are incredibly concerned about the impact on family businesses and on the future of our high streets. We will not be supporting the official opposition party's motion today, which I'm sure they'll be astonished to hear, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sure they are astonished to hear, as you can tell from the chuntering from the benches. Notwithstanding, we do urge the government, in the strongest possible terms, to conduct an impact assessment, and to look again at the amendments that Liberal Democrats tabled to exclude key organisations from their hike in national insurance contributions. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
As the front rank contributions were so substantial in length, and we have so many colleagues wishing to contribute, there is a time limit of 5 minutes. And I call Kanishka Narayan.
I will start, Madam Deputy Speaker, by doing what the opposition failed to do, which is to recognise the particular contribution of family businesses. I think family businesses in the Vale of Glamorgan will be disappointed that the Shadow Chancellor trotted out a generic business conversation rather than honing in on what is special about family businesses. And what is special about family businesses can be counted in the Vale of Glamorgan and across the country. Because, of course, family businesses, Madam Deputy Speaker, make up the majority of businesses in the Vale of Glamorgan. But their contribution cannot just be counted, it can be felt. I feel it on a weekly basis in the sandwiches of Food for Thought Deli in Barry's High Street, where I see the incredible effort that Nathan, Sarah, Leroy and the whole team put in. I felt it on a visit to Clive Edwards' contracts in Colwinston, where Josh Edwards is taking on what his father started. I felt it in the coffee of Welsh Coffee Company, best consumed on the coastline of Ogmore by Sea. And I have felt it very specifically in the joy delivered by the traders of Barry Island, the primary effort drivers that brings waves of tourists to our shores. Madam Deputy Speaker, I mentioned those contributions being felt because they are the distinct contributions of family businesses. The fact that so many family businesses work way over time, putting a huge amount of personal risk, financial risk, and indeed wider collective effort into their businesses. But there is also a wider contribution family businesses make, where the median tenure of a FTSE CEO, Madam Deputy Speaker, is around 5.5 years. The tenure of family businesses is multi-generational. They are the drivers of patient capital decisions. They are the drivers often of conviction in those decisions. And they are the drivers often, as has been mentioned on the other benches, of both philanthropy and values in a number of business decisions. I will give way.
To the honourable member for giving way. I think he is obviously highlighting the value that family businesses have in the community and beyond. I have a constituency who have been investing 80% plus of all their profits back into the business for many years. But now, if they have to, with the changes to BPR, they're going to be in a position where they're going to have to divest equity in the business. Does he agree that that is not the right way to guarantee growth?
I thank the honourable member for her question, but let me say something I was going to come to later, which is, Madam Deputy Speaker, in all my experience of business, the one thing I've learned is businesses are nothing but collections of people. They are mums and dads who drive their kids to schools. They are people who drive through potholes created by the Tory government that they had. They are people who use our waiting lists in the NHS and want to get a decent health service. As I say to the honourable member, of course it's difficult when we have to bear some of the burden of paying for our public services, but the people who benefit are the people who run our family businesses at the heart of it as well. I will hone in again on the contribution that family businesses make, Madam Deputy Speaker, something I'm passionate about in the Vale of Glamorgan. We know that family businesses are now looking at the fact that employment allowances have been doubled. 96% of them are micro businesses employing less than 9 people. In fact, the vast majority are sole proprietorships. They are looking at the fact that the path of corporation tax has been fixed. Stability back after a decade and a half of total chaos. They're looking at the fact that late payments, Madam Deputy Speaker, the absolute fundamental challenge for small businesses and family businesses in the Vale. Late payments have now been cracked down on, and Madam Deputy Speaker, they'll look at today's motion and feel the comfort of their pints being protected too. When I think about the fundamental decision that family businesses make, that decision comes often to the question of endurance. The question in particular of how they can sustain across generations and be productive. And in that context, what the government is doing on late payments, Madam Deputy Speaker, is critical. British family businesses are very limited in their use of external finance. They often rely on cash flow in particular, and so to be able to deliver greater cash flow by tackling late payments is a fundamental contribution of this government. They are also drivers of technological innovation. Almost half of family businesses in this country are users of accountancy software, moving on to bookkeeping digitally far ahead of many other businesses. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm passionate about what this government is doing in driving the adoption not just of technology, but of artificial intelligence software in businesses particularly. And let me end, Madam Deputy Speaker, where I started in my response to the honourable member's question, which is that family businesses are indeed just collections of people. When we're making choices on taxation, we're making choices on spending in our public services, and those are choices that at the heart of it drive the long-term health, the long-term prosperity, the long-term stability, and indeed the long-term effort of our family businesses.
Joy Morrissey. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a privilege to stand here today on behalf of the businesses in Beaconsfield, Marlow and the South Bucks villages. These small family businesses provide the backbone of our economy. They are the job creators. They play a vital role in helping our communities. And they deserve our support in this House. Yet, it is now clear to businesses in my constituency that they find themselves with a Labour government that simply does not understand business. This is a government which seems to think that just by saying the word growth over and over again, it will magically happen. But the truth is, Madam Deputy Speaker, businesses create growth, not hot air from the Chancellor.
Yes, you should try listening to this.
The government is seriously damaging businesses with a national insurance tax rate that will destroy jobs and put at risk thousands of businesses. Time and time again, business owners have warned of the consequences, but they have been met with a wall of silence from the government. Why?
because this Labour government simply do not understand business or the consequences of their actions. At the end of last year, I hosted a roundtable of local businesses, family-run, multi-generational. They have been at the heart of our local economy for decades. And now they are struggling, not just with the concerns of the national insurance, the threshold increase, all of the differences in the employment rights bill that is coming in, but they are concerned with the skills shortages and the economic uncertainty that this is going to cause. And now, thanks to this government's tax rate, they are being forced to make impossible choices, to cut back on hiring, reduce investment, or close their doors altogether. Let me give you just one example. I met the owner of a proud family business serving Marlow for over 88 years. He told me plainly that this government's policies will make it harder for businesses like his to even survive. His story is one I have heard time and time again. This government does not seem to get that in lowering the employment national insurance threshold so dramatically, it has made it almost impossible for businesses that employ lots of people to operate in the low-margin sectors.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady. Isn't the truth, will she agree with me, that what the government policies have done is to create a hostile environment for family businesses to continue to invest in people, hiring people and equipment, and the damages that that reduces growth for our economy?
Thank you. Honourable Friend makes an excellent point. It is damaging. It is a hostile environment for businesses, for entrepreneurs that make a difference, that grow the economy, that grow our tax base. And that is who this government is hurting. The people that will make this country great, will grow us out of any kind of economic issues that we're having now. But by hurting entrepreneurs, by hurting small businesses, we are cutting ourselves off. And we are cutting ourselves off from growth. Again, it is not some mythical word that the Chancellor says. It is actually something that is delivered by hard-working small family businesses in this country. Now, this is not just affecting small businesses, but it is affecting all service-level jobs in our economy. Care services, retail, hospitality, events. They are just a few of the sectors where businesses increasingly face an impossible choice of cutting jobs or shutting their businesses. It is, of course, not just national insurance where the government is raiding businesses or burdening them with over-regulation. Businesses already reeling from the national insurance raid, facing higher business rates, and employment rights bill that is destined to actually lower employment, and the destruction of family farms. Just yesterday, the British Chamber of Commerce described in stark reality the powder keg of costs facing British businesses. In the avalanche of inconvenient facts for the government that the Chamber of Commerce unleashed, one stood out to me. 58% of businesses told the Chamber of Commerce it will impact recruitment. Fewer jobs at a time when we need the economy to be growing. It is economic illiteracy on steroids. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will always stand up for our local family businesses in Beaconsfield, Marlow, and the South Bucks villages. Their message to me has been crystal clear. This government's tax raid is damaging to them, to the jobs, and to growth for the future. I urge the government to wake up to the disaster they are unleashing on businesses in my constituency and across this House.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I refer the House to my register of members' interests. I was very taken by the point made by the Shadow Chancellor when he talked about the excellent inheritance left by the previous government. Now, I dare say we've had to listen to the Shadow Chancellor's views on what this government has done and the benefit of his knowledge and experience of his time in government. I regret to say that I've spent most of my adult life in the Labour Party in opposition. But as a result, I've gained a huge amount of experience about opposition, which I'm more than happy to pass on to the benches opposite. Let me say this very clearly. If you continue to say throughout the next few years, if the party opposite continue to say in the years ahead, up until the next election, that they left an excellent inheritance for this country, you will be sent to an even further electoral oblivion than which you were sent last July. But I urge you to put it on your leaflets. I urge those opposite to put it on their leaflets, because I will certainly be putting it on mine. I will also be putting on leaflets, proudly, the measures in the Employment Rights Bill. Let me talk about some of them. Getting rid of 0 hours contracts, introducing day one rights, and getting rid of fire and rehire. I dare say, I don't think that the party opposite, when this bill passes and when it is a success, that they will be quite so keen to trumpet what terrible things they think these are. But if they wish to, they are more than welcome on those leaflets at the next election to talk about how they want to bring back 0 hours contracts, bring back the ability to introduce fire and rehire, and abolish day one rights. I absolutely will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does he recall that the party opposite, back in the 1990s, under the previous Labour government, opposed the introduction of a national minimum wage vociferously? And might he reflect on that?
I thank my honourable friend. I'm afraid I don't remember, because I am far more youthful than I look. But like the Corn Laws, I have read about it in the history books, and I have no doubt that my honourable friend is correct. I am also aware from the history books that the party opposite have in the past often been very worried about the humble pint, about what might happen to the pint. As a proud pint drinker, perhaps sometimes to my own health and cost, the proud British pint is going absolutely nowhere, not from the small businesses in Gateshead Central and Whickham, and not from anywhere else. I will happily give way.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. He's making a characteristically powerful case. Do the history books not show that Labour has always been the party of the pint, that Harold Wilson expressed enthusiastic support for preserving the pint measure? Labour's the party of the pint. Do the Conservatives not serve up anything more than small bitter?
Well, I again defer to him, to my honourable friend. My friend is a learned historian, and I dare say knows far more about the history of the pint than I will ever muster. I've probably drank more than him, but he's probably read about more of them than I have. But the title of this motion is Family Businesses. My honourable friend for the Vale of Glamorgan has already assiduously made the point to the Shadow Chancellor that 96% of family businesses will not be affected by some of the measures contained within this motion. But I wish to discuss some of the family businesses in my constituency of Gateshead Central Whickham, a couple of whom I've spoken to particularly recently. Meldrums, for example, a successful construction business that recently conducted a transfer into employee ownership, a show of confidence in our economy. Savoir Bakery, set up from scratch during this government. It was a shell during the general election when I went to visit it. But an Orthodox Haredi family in Gateshead, a Gateshead family, generations of the same Gateshead family, have invested hundreds of thousands of pounds of their own money into setting up what some of you might find slightly unlikely. And I'll admit, when I first heard it, I wasn't sure that it was going to be a success myself, but a kosher Parisian patisserie in the heart of Bensham in Gateshead. It has been a tremendous success. There are queues around the block most days, and if last week you make the mistake of going in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as I did, you will be greeted by a coffee machine and an empty patisserie counter. The idea that you cannot set up a successful small business under this government is absolutely for the birds. I have seen it with my own eyes in my own community, in an doing something incredibly challenging in a community that is not often supported more widely within Gateshead. I'm incredibly proud of them and incredibly proud of other small businesses like them. So I'm not astonished that we're here discussing this interesting pick and mix motion, this motion that might as well be called things that the Conservative Party doesn't like that the Labour Party has done, but that is the nature of opposition days, of course. But I'm enjoying this opportunity to talk about the family businesses in Gateshead, nonetheless, to talk about my passion, our passion on these benches for the humble British pint. Do you know what? I'm having so much fun, I will happily give way.
And the honourable gentleman is giving a very, very entertaining speech, and I look forward to visiting that business, I hope, in the future. But he's outlined businesses being set up in his constituency. That's perfectly, he's perfectly entitled to do so. But did he speak to that new business about the £800 per employee extra that this government has put on them through the budget that he's brought in? And what did they have to say about it?
I thank the honourable member for his point. I have spoken to Josh, who runs the business, about every single aspect of that business, and I assure you he is delighted with how his business is going. And I am delighted that this and the members opposite are chuntering from a sedentary position, as of course is their right. But my high street in Gateshead, for example, which I'm pleased to say that the minister who will be responding later has been to visit, was wrecked under the last government. The decisions made under the last government had a profound impact on my high street, a profound impact on high streets across this country. So the idea that they are tribunes of small business, I'm afraid for the birds. This government is going to rebuild the Great British High Street, and we're going to rebuild it by supporting small businesses. I'll be voting against this motion today, quite rightly, because I'm afraid, to quote a former leader of the party opposite, it is an inverted pyramid of piffle.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to stand here on behalf of dozens, probably hundreds of businesses across Bromsgrove, many of which are run by families. And it's really quite discomforting to also stand here and hear from Labour sort of a sense of sheer denial and arrogance as to what actually drives growth in our economy. I think what I find most despondent of all is that the government's default ideological position is one where their sort of mentality is what taxes can we raise, rather than how can we as government cut our cloth accordingly and pass on the benefits of that to the economy in the form of reduced taxes. Their default position is what taxes can we increase on the businesses that provide the very backbone of our prosperity. And in that vein, family businesses provide employment for almost 14 million people across the country, and they contribute £575 billion to the national economy. And these businesses are founded on principles of entrepreneurialism, which I'm proud that my party has championed for decades. Labour are showing once again that they do not understand the value of business. They only know how to tax and to regulate enterprise that ultimately makes our economy weaker and poorer. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful. They may speak of their support for small business and they may speak of their passion for it, but they will never speak of their experience of setting up and running one. Very limited experience on those benches, and isn't that actually part of the problem? Having never set up and run one, they have no idea of the impact of their policies on one.
I agree wholeheartedly. I think that strikes at the heart of the government's lack of appreciation for what fundamentally drives the economy. I will give way.
To be fair to the opposition, we may not know what their CVs show, so there could be business experience there. It's just not on a CV.
My honourable friend probably raises a very valid point, Madam Deputy Speaker. But let's just look at the facts. The government will attempt to tarnish Conservatives' record, but in July, Labour inherited the fastest growing economy in the G7, with unemployment near record lows and inflation at the Bank of England's target. We've seen a complete reversal of this, and that is in part due to the choices that the government have made in their budget that has destroyed that progress. The budget from the government and their fundamental approach overall threatens the future of family businesses through new red tape. We've got the family business tax, the family farm tax, the national insurance jobs tax. Businesses know that they are paying more. The government know that businesses are paying more. And I don't know how some of them have the gall to frankly sit there and accept that their position is one of honesty and credibility when it comes to growing the economy. I'd like to cite an example, if I can, Madam Deputy Speaker, a business in my patch that have got in touch with me. And this comes from Jack, whose family run an apprenticeship training provider. Jack said, "My parents left school with no qualifications. Over the last 50 years, they've worked hard, paying their way, getting on, building a good life and business for us as a family. Since 2007, they've been majority shareholders and owners of a business called Birmingham Electrical Training, which Jack is also a director. They are currently the second biggest provider of electrical apprenticeships in the UK and train 700 plus apprentices in partnership with 275 local and national contractors, many of which reside and work within the West Midlands region. They hold a Department of Education contract. They're recognised by the electrical industry in providing a crucial role in training the next generation of electricians. Pertinent point, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the government is pursuing policies such as the ludicrous clean heat market mechanism, which will require a step change in electrical contractors in order to deliver on some of the government's net zero folly. But the point that Jack makes, and he quotes this, there is no way that I would be able to afford the £800,000 worth of tax to access the business which I've had to build and grow over the past 10 years as a result of the changes announced by the Chancellor to inheritance tax. He will personally be liable for £800,000 that he will not be in a position to pay. This jeopardises a family business that is at the forefront and backbone of the country's economy. He asks, why would the government want to destroy family business, which is crucial to helping local people, providing growth in years to come? And this is not an isolated case, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Confederation of British Industry and Family Business UK have warned that changes to business property relief could lead to up to 125,000 job losses and reduce economic output by £9.4 billion, as their analysis found average family businesses would cut investment by a staggering 16.5%, reduce headcount by 10.2%, and lose turnover of 74%. This recognises that government does not appreciate the fundamental benefits, the positive benefits to wider society of promoting small businesses and their long-term financial viability. The government is making the UK a hostile destination for investment, both large and small. Government must work to ensure that our country is the most attractive possible destination for businesses to invest and grow and to make us wealthier.
Will the honourable member give way?
I will give way.
Thank you. For some family businesses, like for some that are in my constituency, their main competitors are actually international companies. Does my honourable friend agree with me that this government has not actually considered how increasing costs for UK businesses is actually making some of our family businesses less competitive?
My honourable friend, she hits the nail on the head. And what particularly rings in my ears, Madam Deputy Speaker, are words from the Chancellor just a few months ago when she said that businesses need to cut their cloth accordingly. And I go back to my initial point. Government must also cut its cloth accordingly. The default position of government in order to support business should be, how can government spend taxpayers' money, that those are the funds generated by the very businesses that we're talking about, in the most efficient way possible so that we can have as low a tax base in our economy as possible to make the UK that great destination for inward investment.
He's talking about cutting its cloth, so perhaps he can tell the 14 million people employed by family businesses how he would cut the public services they rely on in order to be able to fund the unfunded tax claims he's making.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the intervention that the honourable gentleman has made is a good one in that you demonstrate the point. The honourable member, Madam Deputy Speaker, demonstrates the point that his party philosophically believes that you either have to tax or cut. They don't have any appreciation. The government has no appreciation, Madam Deputy Speaker, of the fact that money could be spent more effectively in the first instance. It's a fundamental ideological weakness with the government.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does he think...
Please be seated. You have 10 seconds left, Mr. Thomas. Do you want to finish?
I'll finish, Madam Deputy Speaker, by saying that I will always be proud to stand up for small businesses in Bromsgrove and villages and across the country.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I draw attention to my declarations in the Register of Interests. It's a pleasure to follow my constituency neighbour, and I will just say that the clean heat market mechanism that he spoke about and which is causing concern to business in his constituency was, of course, brought forward by the last Conservative government. But I'd start by talking about the Employment Rights Bill, because some of us have just spent 2 months in committee going line by line through that bill, and I thought that the House might want to hear about some of the opinions and positions put forward by the opposition through that process. Because we heard that the opposition tried to exempt millions of workers in some of the lowest paying sectors from protection against harassment at work. We heard from the Shadow Minister that he does not believe that public sector employers should offer facility time at all. They attempted to block better contracts for teaching assistants and other low-paid members of school support staff. And a witness was presented as representative of business opinion who had previously said that lockdowns would kill far more people than COVID. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do not think that the motion or the party putting it forward is a credible voice of economic growth or business. I will give way.
The Independent Regulatory Policy Committee back in November looked at this very bill and said that 8 out of the 23 categories were, I quote, not fit for purpose. Was that discussed? And given it's independent, does he give that any credit when it comes to discussing that bill?
Thank him for his intervention, and one of the pleasures of that committee is that we have 970 pages of transcripts where this was discussed at length, and the government is indeed bringing forward further impact assessments on those points. But looking at my constituency, indeed the constituencies of all the members of this House, the economic record that we've inherited is one of pallid economic growth and wage growth. In the last 15 years, average real wages in Birmingham Northfield were £300 lower each month than they were in 2010. The costs of delayed and cancelled NHS appointments, of crime that goes without investigation, and shortages in key teaching posts is borne by constituents. It is borne by businesses as well. So we should say this clearly: public services create value. Businesses and the people who work for them need strong public services to sustain themselves and to grow. And in fact, when I met small businesses on Northfield High Street recently, we had, as you would expect, Madam Deputy Speaker, a serious and robust discussion about a whole range of government policies and policies enacted by the previous government. But the first issue that they raised was crime and anti-social behaviour. And anyone who has been a victim of crime will be able to attest to the devastating impact that it can have on a person or business. I will, of course, give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He makes a really eloquent point about the issues of antisocial behaviour and crime on the economy, and particularly small businesses. Would he recognise that small businesses like mine in Harlow have been massively affected by the increase in crime and antisocial behaviour? I'm thinking particularly in terms of tool theft and theft of vehicles.
Yeah.
I thank my honourable friend. I think he makes a very sensible point, and the issues that he raises are exactly reflected in my constituency. It is one of the major barriers to getting jobs and to getting spending into our high streets. And if the budget last year had failed to raise money for investment in public services, then it would have been a bit like changing a colour on a shovel before continuing to dig a hole in the same old ditch. We could not prolong the failed approach of the last 14 years. Add to that the disgraceful situation that awaited the incoming Labour government, and for all the sound and fury that we've heard from the party opposite, there is little mystery now about this. Richard Hughes, the chair of the OBR, told the Treasury Committee that, and I'm quoting, "When we had a high trust relationship with the Treasury, those things were being well managed and managed within the total. That system very clearly broke down. There was about 9.5 billion worth of net pressure on departments' budgets, which they did not disclose to us, which under the law and under the Act they should have done so." And decisions that awaited the incoming government on public sector pay, which is the other element of the 22 billion, had been ducked and delayed until after the election. We need to be clear on this. The Right Honourable Member is indicating from a sedentary position, but he will know, of course, the situation with the School Teachers' Pay Review Body, because Conservative ministers already knew the recommendations of the STRB, and they knew too that the recommendations of the other review bodies tend to be similar. So why were those recommendations delayed? Remembering that the pay year starts not in July, or even at the beginning of the pre-election period, it starts in April. It is because Conservative ministers and their departments were late to submit the remit letters and evidence. And the Office of Manpower Economics has been very clear on this point. It has said, and I quote, "The work of the PRBs is demand-led and essentially non-negotiable. Departments set remits and timetables." So that is the truth of the matter, Madam Deputy Speaker. Those additional costs were always coming, and the only reason why they came 7 months into an election year was because Conservative ministers were content for it to be so delayed. Now, the party opposite claim that they would not have accepted those recommendations, but they have not said at any single point what their position, what their offer to public sector workers would have been. So I wonder whether any honourable member from the party opposite can tell us today, had they won the election, if it was not 5.5%, what would their offer have been? It should not be a hard question to answer. What would the difference have been in the pay packets of nurses and teachers and our members of the armed forces? I'd be very happy to take an intervention on that point. They cannot answer the question, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will give way.
The side, can I just put on the record, this has been a hugely important week for this House and the increase in defence spending, and just how important it was that on these benches we gave a 6% pay rise to members of our armed forces, the biggest in 20 years.
Makes the point as well as it can be made, and I thank him for his intervention. And in the remaining seconds, let us not forget either the cost to businesses inflicted by the last government, from their botched EU withdrawal policies up to £7.5 billion each year, according to HMRC, from customs checks alone, £1 billion in cost to businesses due to higher energy trading costs, and a further £1 billion in the costs of chemical regulations alone in that sector every single year. As one of their former Prime Ministers said, something like, "Screw business." At least we can say on that he lived up to his word. Now, the motion before us is not a serious proposition. It has not been put forward by a serious opposition, and I hope it will be rejected tonight.
Esther McVey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have to say I'm disappointed, as will business owners up and down the country, that the Chancellor couldn't find her way into the chamber today. Because if she had done, she might have learnt a thing or two. Now, in Tatton, there are family businesses that go back 4 and 5 generations, and some were planning, before this budget, to be getting ready for the next generation. Not now. Some, founded in the 1800s, have told me that their businesses survived 2 world wars, have survived the Spanish flu, the high tax and economic lunacy of the 1970s, even the recent COVID lockdowns. But this Chancellor's budget will be the death of them. They've said to me that on their family business gravestone will be written RIP 1830 to 2026, Reeves' budget, the fatal blow.
Yes.
Here we have a Chancellor who wanted her legacy to be that she was the first female Chancellor, when in fact her legacy will be the grim Reeves Reaper, who fatally killed off family businesses and destroyed enterprise in the UK. This Labour government shows no signs of understanding business, let alone family businesses that employ 14 million people and add 575 billion to the economy. A family business is a living entity. It needs to be nurtured, and if it is, it will grow and last hundreds of years. It will pass on to the next generation. And it has a unique place in the business ecosystem. It serves a special purpose. Even previous Labour governments has known that. That's why they did the business property REIT, because they knew it was required.
Yeah, exactly.
But not this Labour government. No. Oh no, because now the death of a family member could spell the death of the family business too. Yes. The CBI and the Family Business UK have warned that these changes to just property business relief alone could lead to 125,000 job losses and reduce an economic output by 9.4 billion. Yes. These tax changes, well, business have got to look at this. And as they think how much money they're going to put aside for these tax changes, every pound they put into tax means it's £1 less that will go into investment for their business, which will stifle growth of the company. This from a Labour government that has talked about growth will only kill off growth. And if it's not just for the impact of this inheritance tax, we've got the family farm tax, we've got the increase to employers' national insurance contribution, we've got the minimum wage changes. Every single one of these are going to add to the final nail in many of our businesses. I will indeed.
I thank the right honourable lady for giving way. Will she agree? Will the honourable lady agree with me that the myriad of Labour's attacks on family businesses will have a huge impact on businesses like Vosper's vehicle franchise in my constituency, founded in 1946, employs 600 people, facing £1.4 million increase in national insurance contributions and a future BPR levied on the next generation, in an industry that has seen a reduction of 20% in sales in January this year alone, following the government's so-called growth budget?
My honourable friend speaks knowledgeably and passionately about the business in her constituency, and she is right. And a family business I spoke to, well, they will say, we're already working on small profits. We don't know how we're going to cope. The enormity of these changes are going to change the way we look at our business. So what are we going to do? We might have to carve them up. We might have to cut them down. We might end up selling them. It might be through foreign investment, whether we're seeking them out or whether they seek us out. But what they're saying is the business will not survive and thrive. It will no doubt shrink or it will end. Yes. So I will touch on another point, because I think this is essential and other people have talked about it. Family businesses are the breeding ground of entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It is where people, family members, will work of a weekend, where they will be trained up and they will go into that business. People talked about love and passion and whatever, all these things, absolutely. But it is that entrepreneurial spirit that this government is going to kill. Absolutely. And it's going to kill jobs in local communities, and that's why I talk about the special place of family business, because they are right in the heart of this community. Now, this Chancellor said that these changes would only impact the wealthiest of businesses. Haven't we heard that before? The farm tax would only impact the wealthiest of farms. Supposedly, their removal of the winter fuel payment would only impact the wealthiest of pensioners. And the VAT on schools would only impact the wealthiest of people. This is utter nonsense. What we are saying is a Labour Party removed from reality and ideologically driven and full and blinded by jealousy.
Yes, absolutely.
So, the raid that they have done on family businesses, worth about 500 million by 2030, that's the Treasury's forecast, is actually going to lose billions of pounds more. These tax changes are ideologically driven, and the Chancellor is killing the geese that laid the golden the golden eggs. They have, on the opposite benches, a complete vacuum of business know-how and business knowledge. It is an utter disgrace what they're doing to our country.
Yeah. I call Deirdre Costigan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I draw the House's attention to my register of interests. Unusually, I welcome today's motion from the Conservative Party because it sets down on the record, loud and clear, that they are no friend of working people, and they are no friend of working women in particular. Their motion calls for an end to Labour's groundbreaking employment rights bill and would allow bad employers to continue to exploit workers, to sack anyone who objects, and to continue paying women less than men. This isn't a surprise, of course, with the leader of the opposition having already made clear she thinks maternity pay has gone too far and is excessive. Madam Deputy Speaker, statutory maternity pay is based on your earnings, and for most of the leave period it's set at a maximum of £184 a week, or 90% of your normal pay, whichever is lower. That translates to about £9,500 a year. I don't think many women, or indeed their partners, would think this is excessive. So I'm at least grateful the Conservatives are being honest today, that they couldn't care less about working people. Now, the Shadow Chancellor earlier was unable to tell us which bit of the Employment Rights Bill they wanted to get rid of. Well, he should read his own motion. It's written down in black and white. Their motion explicitly objects to Labour's new law to finally make employers put a stop to sexual harassment in the workplace, and to take all reasonable steps to stop sexual harassment of staff and by customers, contractors and service users too. This is something the Conservatives seem especially against in their motion, which is peculiar because just 2 years ago they said they were going to bring in exactly the same law. Exactly the same. What happened? Oh yes, I know. They abandoned working women, broke their promises and left shop workers, office staff and women managers to the mercy of sexual harassers. And they want to do the same today. Now, the other new law in Labour's Employment Rights Bill that they seem especially against, and it's in their motion that the Shadow Chancellor hasn't read, is the ending of the exploitative zero-hours contracts. Their motion instead supports the continued mistreatment of often low-paid workers who don't know from 1 week to the next how much work they'll get and if they'll be able to pay their bills. And let's be clear, sexual harassment can often go hand in hand with exploitative zero-hours contracts. Imagine how difficult it is for a low-paid woman to complain about her manager's inappropriate sexual behaviour if she's relying on him to give her enough hours to feed her family next week. Zero-hours contracts put way too much power in the hands of managers, and with proper business planning, there's simply no need for them to be forced on workers. In their motion, the Conservatives seem to have confused knowing what your hours are in advance with the new right to flexible working, which Labour is also introducing. They claim these two things are in conflict. Of course they're not. You can still have a zero-hours contract if you want to. But if you want guaranteed hours so you have a secure income for your family, then you will be entitled to that. And if you want to work part-time because you have kids or elderly parents, then you will have a new right to flexible working that will allow that too. Now, the Conservative motion isn't clear on whether they support flexible working or not, but surely the Leader of the Opposition should understand and embrace Labour's new right to flexible working, given her reported invention of Chemi Mean Time, or KMT, to explain being half an hour late for everything. But maybe it's one law for her and another for the workers. Madam Deputy Speaker, in this motion, the Conservatives have squarely and unashamedly set themselves against working people and working women especially. But the British people made a choice on the 4th of July. They voted for a party that would stand up for working people, that would keep its promises to outlaw sexual harassment at work and end exploitative zero-hours contracts. And that's why Labour will vigorously and vociferously vote down the Conservatives' attempt to stop these changes today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mike Party.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I'm sure you can follow that.
It will be hard to follow that. I'll probably be doing it with a lower level of energy. So I recently met with Peter, Kate and Edward, who run 2 Basil's Cafe in Tunbridge Wells, and they are a family who run 4 cafes across Kent. Family business is the subject of today's motion. And the honourable members here need to pipe down after the damage they did to the economy when they were in government. Now, I met them recently, and they told me that the combination of minimum wage, national insurance rises and business rates, and it's the combination of all three has got them on their knees. And the only thing that they can do, and bearing in mind that they are a family business, their staff are also their friends, and these are hubs in our community, but the only option that they have is to lay off staff, or in some cases in the future to not grow their employment in the way that they had planned. And if we zoom out a little bit, about a month ago I met with the Tunbridge Wells hospitality reps, and these are the owners of pubs, restaurants, hotels and bars in Tunbridge Wells, and most of those are small businesses. They're all small businesses, and most of them are family businesses. And as we went round the table, it's the same story from them as well. It's the combination of all three coming at the same time, which means that they are either looking at laying off staff now or delaying plans for future employment. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and for the excellent way in which he's setting out the problems faced by many family businesses in Tunbridge Wells. And for me in Mid-Sussex, I recently spoke to the owners of Frank's Diner on Church Road in Burgess Hill, and they said exactly what my honourable friend is saying, that it's that combination of different moves that they are finding punishingly hard, and they are worried that they're going to have to close their business if things don't improve soon and the government doesn't think again. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the government really does need to look again and needs to think harder about the impact that their decisions are having on small family businesses?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and I think that this is not hyperbole. These are real stories from real businesses, and these are people who stay up at night trying to juggle a P&L or trying to look at how it is they are going to pay those national insurance contributions or how they're going to pay the business rates at the end of the month. These are real stories. But if I could just, and we don't have much time, I just want to zoom out a little bit and make a couple of points, and then I'd like to make an ask of the Minister. The first thing about hospitality is that many of us had our first jobs working in hospitality. My first job when I was 16 was as a dishwasher in a hotel. And of course the question is whether you would employ me now with these laws, or would you invest in equipment that could automate that dishwashing to a point where you don't need to employ so many 16-year-olds. And, you know, I came from a very relatively privileged background, but working in a hotel as a dishwasher or as a gardener and a labourer, all those other things I did when I was young, were incredibly important experiences in forming me into the person that I am now. So we do want these businesses to be able to employ people in their first jobs, because we only ever have one first boss. The second point, the second societal point that I would like to make, is that hospitality particularly sits in this ecosystem in our town centres. It's hospitality, it's retail, and it's leisure. And of course, one of those things will bring people into a town centre, and they will often then go and visit another business from one of the other three legs or corners of that triangle. And the hospitality in particular, as has been mentioned by people from both sides of the House, acts as a glue in our society. And one of the things that I have noticed since being elected last July is actually how atomised our society is. How many people, particularly after the pandemic, do struggle with that sense of belonging, and we are looking for communities to belong to. And hospitality, whether it's having a pint or meeting your mates for some chips or whatever it is, actually this provides some of the glue that holds us together. And if our societies are glued together better, all sorts of other things like antisocial behaviour order and crime and health, right? Social connection improves our health. All of those things get easier, and that of course costs the government less money on other budgetary lines. So I would just like to ask the Minister one thing, and I know that we've had this increase in business rates in the budgets, and I know that the Chancellor's not going to go back on the national insurance rises, and they're not going to go back on the minimum wage. But on the business rates, they have indicated that they are there is currently a consultation out, and they are asking people to contribute to that. And what I would ask is that we don't just look at it from in the manner of a spreadsheet, as the Treasury often does. Although that is important, we must support those businesses financially. But we also have to understand that retail and hospitality and leisure in our town centres contribute to the glue that holds our society together, and we must, when we reform business rates, consider that as well.
Joe Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow some measured and passionate speeches from across the House on this very much subject. I'm very proud, as members will know, to represent England's largest constituency by geographic area, and to represent an area that was found to be one of the happiest in the country, one of the best senses of community and belonging. Over the recent recess, I was able to host a roundtable with the conductors of the Belonging Barometer, at which were many local businesses, many community organisations. And as has just been said, family businesses are indeed the glue that binds together many of the strands of our community, particularly across the Tyne Valley. And in the aftermath of Storm Airwin, we've seen really heartening examples of particularly family-run businesses coming out, helping their community, providing those places to stay, those places to recuperate for communities that have taken a battering from extreme weather events that are sadly becoming all too common. Now, to return slightly to the motion, I was disappointed when I read it that once again we're here discussing a kind of hodgepodge of various gripes and groans that the Conservative Party have got with government policy. And that is absolutely fine, as is their right to do so. And there are members on the Tory benches sitting here now that I genuinely respect and in some cases admire, but they're better than that, and they should be better than that. And some of them can laugh if they want. Although, you know, I know that some of them have got considerable experience writing manifestos that perhaps don't play out so well. Ultimately, what we need to achieve is an environment in which family businesses and small businesses across the country and across our constituencies are genuinely supported by government. And one of the things that's come to my attention since being elected as the first non-Conservative MP for Hexham in a century was a lot of businesses have said to me that it's nice to have an MP that's really connected to the constituency, one that's not complacent. And compared to some of the treatment that rural communities have received from the Conservative Party in years past, MPs who are genuinely rooted in their communities, who went to school in those communities, who got their first jobs in local businesses, can speak to and with businesses in their constituencies to actually deliver messages down here. And I've had conversations with businesses like Broxbush's Farm Shop, which did involve some patient disagreement over the budget, but did also involve mainly real concerns over local infrastructure, about lack of bus stops on the A69, about the difficulties that the young people they employed have getting to their business in order to work. They do a fantastic job. And my now fiancée and I went pumpkin picking there just after the election. It was a wonderful event. Although I think Hannah probably enjoyed it more than I did. But ultimately, having those positive conversations and looking at what business needs, it's infrastructure, it's investment, it's a government that listens, not one that embarks on some kind of haywire, high-minded ideological crusade, as the party opposite did when in government. They can laugh. I'll happily give way, yes.
I'm grateful to him for giving way. Does he agree that one of the other major challenges that food small businesses face is importing and exporting ingredients, and this needs to be a focus for the review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement next year?
The honourable member's far more well-read and well-researched than I could ever hope to be, but it's something that does come up. That those barriers to import and export come up whenever I speak to farmers. It comes up whenever I speak to food businesses. Yeah. That getting the products made by fantastic businesses in our communities out to consumers simply is not as easy as it used to be. But the main concern that I get in my constituency is infrastructure, is bus routes, is a lack of roads that are in some cases navigable. I went out to visit the village of Newton, which it's not really a pothole, it's more of a small gorge that's been carved into the road, and to hear about updates on the parish council's sort of continued missives to the county council. That is the kind of thing that holds back small and family businesses in my constituency. It holds them back because they simply don't know if the delivery driver is going to be able to get to their premises. They don't know if they'll be able to get to work. That is what is causing real uncertainty and real harm to businesses. And I would just urge members opposite to get a grip on their party, to object to some of the more terminally online things like this conspiracy theory over the pint, which is, as I've said, beneath them.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Britain's got talent. Right across this great land, we have many clever people innovating and working hard. As a member of the Business and Trade Committee, I have been in places as far apart as Exeter and Glasgow, talking with people who make everything from satellites to sausage rolls. The mood, however, is not good. The strivers are still striving, straining every sinew to deliver success. But confidence is not so much on the floor as deep in the cellars below. In my constituency of Dumfries and Galloway, I spoke with a family firm of bakers who had modest expansion plans, 2 or 3 extra staff drawn from the ranks of youngsters who might struggle to find that all-important first job. Those plans are parked. Those youngsters, for all I know, are on the dole. Similarly, the Usual Place, a charity in Dumfries which provides wonderful opportunities for youngsters in catering, is making cutbacks. 6 people will lose their jobs, and as the reality of the anti-business agenda, designed at 11 Downing Street, bites. When we in government proposed raising national insurance to fund the NHS, one Labour backbencher denounced it as the worst possible tax rise. Now that same politician is Chancellor, and the tune has changed. And spare us the claim that Labour's manifesto pledge on national insurance covered only that paid directly by employees. Sophistry. Sheer sophistry. Mr Speaker, we lack not for start-ups in Britain, but we struggle for scale-ups, the firms that expand and grow. Family businesses are often among the front rank of successful scale-ups, as their multi-generational nature and the investment, literal and metaphorical, of senior figures imbues a stability. The Prime Minister talks a good game, but talk is cheap, and his actions have expensive consequences. He said he and his Chancellor made clear to Cabinet colleagues that in each of their briefs, growth is the #1 mission. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister didn't hear. Perhaps her rave music was too loud. For how is growth compatible with her Employment Rights Bill, which the government's own analysis says will cost businesses up to £5 billion a year? £5 billion when grandparents are in tears as family farms face being split up. £5 billion when families that have been in business for decades look at their bottom line and despair. And the worst aspect of this bill is the premise that all trade union organisers are saints and all business owners robber barons intent on exploiting the workers. The unions are restive. The Secretary of State for Scotland would not attend a reception in his own magnificent Dover house because of a picket line. And how ironic that the meeting was with the Scottish CBI. Now those same strikers have forced the cancellation of a Scotland Office event with National Air Traffic Services. I've said before, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I make no apology for saying it again, unions going to party like it's 1979. The party opposite sees business as a dripping roast to be devoured, taxed to a standstill, and not much mischief if it fails. They perceive an ability in the public sector, which they see when they see only avarice in the private. They are as wrong about that as they are about profit being a dirty word. The drivers of growth are in the private sector. They deserve our admiration and, more importantly, our support. What can government do for them? How about getting out of the way? How about less legislation, not more? How about less petty regulation and more can-do attitude? Lighten the tax load, not add to it. Labour needs to step away from its anti-business policies so that firms in every part of the country can step up with wealth creation, with the private sector leading the charge. Thank you.
I call Becky Gittins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The economy that this Labour government inherited was a total mess. We had a Conservative government that for so long ignored the problems that were building up. Instead of looking for the solutions, they obfuscated and kicked problems into the long grass. When they did make decisions, like Liz Truss's mini-budget, it led to catastrophic outcomes for our economy, many of which our constituents are still paying off in their mortgages today and will be doing for some time to come. Whether it was money for a failed Rwanda scheme or for dodgy COVID contracts, the Conservatives wasted money by making bad decisions, and the public paid the price. Inheriting an economy in such a perilous state meant that there were inevitably difficult decisions to make. Decisions that could not have been anticipated until the true extent of the previous government's economic incompetence had been exposed in the summer of last year. What the budget did do last autumn is clearly set out our path to recovery, fixing the foundations, focusing on growth and ensuring that we are giving our economy the stability and investment and the reform required to get us away from the doom loop of the Tories and back to growth. So yes, there have been tough choices. We on this side don't shy away from that. However, these choices mean that we can invest in our public services, including our NHS, driving down those waiting lists. The UK government has... The UK government has prioritised investment in Wales's future. The result of last year's budget is the largest funding boost Wales has received since devolution. £21 billion of new money. People in Wales will see the benefits of this both through the Barnett formula but also through direct spending. The budget provides a record £1.7 billion spending boost for the Welsh Government to support public services like our NHS. The investment in our public services means more neighbourhood policing. Again, something our constituents and our local business communities desperately want to see. More funding available to help support the delivery of 13,000 more police officers, PCSOs and special constables in our communities, keeping our streets safe and protecting small retail businesses from the shoplifting being allowed to run rife under the previous government's £200 rule. This is what my constituents want to see. They want a government on their side. The opposition are more than happy to take all of the benefits that this additional investment will provide, but I would politely suggest that by not outlining how they will pay for it all, their position lacks real credibility. I note that the Shadow Cabinet has already wrapped up around £7 billion in unfunded spending commitments. Again, not serious enough. I am heartened that the government has taken concrete steps to protect the smallest businesses and charities. The employment allowance will double to £10,500, meaning some 250,000 employers will gain, and an additional 820,000 will see no change at all. I know that organisations like the Federation of Small Businesses have welcomed these changes, as do the many small businesses in Clwyd East who gain from the uplift of the employment allowance. In North Wales, we've already seen the benefits of two governments working together in Wales and Westminster, both utterly focused on investment and growth. We've seen investments in Airbus, Kellogg's, Shotton Mill and more in our little corner of North Wales already, with the same business confidence exemplified by the £63 billion raised in this government's investment summit. And the green jobs will be critical in North Wales's future. Last week, the Port of Mostyn in my constituency paved the way for some 300 new jobs, helping support the offshore wind industry. Madam Deputy Speaker, when I go out to speak to businesses in my constituency, family businesses like Jones Brothers and the Clwyd Farm, they don't simply make representations like those we've heard from the opposition benches, but they share the government's passion on the skills agenda and apprenticeships, on reforming our restrictive planning regime, and the need for investment in our NHS, which this government is already prioritising. This government is continuing to promote entrepreneurship, attracting billions of pounds of investment and providing the certainty that our businesses need, not least as part of the Flintshire and Wrexham investment zone. Madam Deputy Speaker, businesses in Clwyd East deserve better than the faux outrage from the Conservative Party, and this government will not allow the party opposite to pretend to be the champions of British business. Not the Conservative government who sold our farmers down the river through detrimental trade deals, the Conservative government who ran down our economy with Liz Truss's mini-budget, short-term thinking and decimated business confidence. It is the Labour government who are committed to providing our economy with the stability and investment it needs to grow, laying the foundations for thriving businesses at the heart of prosperous communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased that the opposition is using our time today to debate the importance of businesses large and small. It is the private sector that creates the wealth on which our society depends. It is the taxes they pay that funds our NHS and other important public services. The policies of this Labour government, from raising taxes to imposing additional regulations, are putting those businesses at risk. Having promised not to increase NICs at the general election, the Chancellor immediately broke that promise in the budget. This national insurance hike will cost employers £900 for every employee earning the average salary. The tax rise disproportionately affects employees on low wages. Someone earning £9,000 a year will cost their employer an extra £600 a year in tax. This is not just a tax on businesses, it's a tax on jobs. Labour has introduced a £25 billion jobs tax that will increase the cost of hiring workers. Labour has also increased business rates by £2.7 billion. Under the Conservatives, businesses in the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors received a 75% relief on their business rates. Now Labour has reduced this relief to just 40%.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Happy to give way.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that both the reduction in hospitality rate relief and the threshold that he's just acknowledged with regard to lower earnings actually creates a perfect storm for hospitality businesses, not just because of the additional rate pressure, but in fact they are less incentivised to recruit part-time workers, which have been acknowledged by other members as a route for young people into often their first employment opportunity?
I thank the honourable member for his contribution. He is right. All Labour's measures will increase unemployment. And although Labour will say that they have reduced the multiplier of business rates, this does not fully compensate. It leaves an average pub paying an additional £5,500 a year. This is not a sustainable burden for many businesses that are already struggling with inflation and rising costs. These taxes add up, and they will lead to closures, job losses and harm to our communities. Another troubling decision from the Labour Party is the reduction of the cap on business property relief. BPR was designed to protect family-owned businesses from being broken up. It was introduced in 1976 by Dennis Healey to ensure that businesses could continue to provide jobs and contribute to the economy across generations. It's extraordinary that Labour have found a Chancellor less sympathetic to businesses than Healey. This decision is a blow to those who have worked tirelessly to build and sustain their businesses. It will force families to sell their businesses or take on crippling debts just to pay the taxman. For many, this will be the end of their family businesses.
Absolutely right.
The Employment Rights Bill requires employers to spend £150 per employee on additional administrative costs to comply with new rules, including a ban on zero-hour contracts and potential liabilities for third-party harassment. At a time when businesses are already under strain, this is further unnecessary cost, especially for small businesses that don't have the resources to navigate this red tape. Now, having spent 11 weeks going through the Employment Rights Bill line by line, I know just how damaging it will be to SMEs in Bridgwater and elsewhere. Let us take just one example, the so-called Day One rights. This would mean that if it became apparent that after less than a week a new employee was the wrong fit for a company, a complicated process must be followed to dismiss them. Now, speaking as a former, though fully qualified, solicitor, I know that this will have a disproportionate effect on those small businesses without an HR department. If they don't dot all the I's and cross all the T's, they are left exposed to being taken to court for unfair dismissal. Another example, I'm happy to give way.
Thank him for giving way. I understand the point he's making, but is it not the case that in that specific circumstance, an employee after a week, they will be covered by the new probationary period provision, which is writing the probationary period into the law for the first time?
Honourable friend would be correct if in fact there was a written contract that included a probationary period. But what he forgets is that many small businesses will conclude that contract on a handshake and a verbal agreement. There won't be a formal probationary period. It is exactly those small businesses that haven't got a written contract that will be liable to legal action. Another example is that should a business fail to notify a new employee of their right to join a trade union in writing, they may be liable to pay an additional 4 weeks' pay as a compensatory award. Now, in what world is this system really going to work? Do we believe that those that run a corner shop or a pub or a fishmonger are going to give their employees written notice that they have the right to join a trade union? No, they won't, and legal consequences will follow. Now, on these benches, we believe that businesses are at the heart of the economy, and they should not be punished by government policies that stifle growth and investment. It's important to note that this government's track record when it comes to business is deeply troubling. Just one member of the Cabinet has ever started a business. When decisions are made by those who don't understand the pressures faced by small business owners, it is no surprise that the policies are so harmful. The Labour government we face is not a new Labour government in the Tony Blair model. It is very much a 1970s old Labour government, addicted to taxing, spending, borrowing and regulating. And I regret to say we will see unemployment rise. We will support family businesses, safeguard jobs and ensure that the British economy prospers. Thank you.
I call Sir Keith Batty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I refer members to my register of interest because I spent the best part of a decade in my family business as a qualified chartered accountant with a certificate, fully qualified with a certificate to match. My family business was a firm of accountants. My father set it up, and I just reflect on some of the remarks from the opposite benches and the government benches. And I meet them with a degree of sadness and anger. I think that will be reflected in the businesses in my constituency, as well as many family businesses across the country, because we should be under no doubt that this budget put forward by the Chancellor has been deeply, deeply damaging. And I think my honourable friend from Hinckley and Bosworth said it correctly when he intervened on the Shadow Chancellor about how it's a toxic concoction of measures, which means that now, for the first time, many businesses will be wondering whether it's even worth setting up in business. And of course, the decisions that we take in this House do matter because they result in costs. And businesses are not just, and family businesses specifically, are not just some opaque term. They are individuals with hopes and dreams and aspirations, and the cost of the decisions that the Chancellor has taken, the political choices that she has made, and that members opposite are now defending, mean that those decisions will incur costs on those businesses, they will be passed on to consumers and those clients, and ultimately they will feed in to costs of services and therefore costs of living. And so when we see the inflation rate increase from the 2% that we left it and to 3%, of course there's a consequence from the decisions that the Chancellor's making. And I think members opposite, may not want to accept that today, and I understand that, but they may well want to reflect on that. I think the honourable member from Hexham, who I know didn't name the Tory members that he respects, and I hope he does at some point. But the member talked about this kind of made up idea, this motion. These are not things that we've brought up. These are what businesses are telling us. This is what they're talking about every day, and I'm more than happy to give examples. I spoke to a business the other day, which is it's got a subsidiary in my constituency. 400 million turnover, family business, over 160 years old. It was looking to be a billion turnover company by 2030, which meant more employment, more jobs, more products for supply chains. They've had to put a whole hold on that, because if the father of that business now passes away, the inheritance tax bill will come to about £2 million. But because it's a family business and dividends will have to be found and the cash will have to be found, they have to find something like £18 million to fund that, which means that he said to me they'd probably have to sell about 7% of the business to be able to finance an inheritance tax bill, which is incredibly difficult for them to prepare for. I've got Eric Lyons in my constituency, a butcher's which is over 100 years old, and Nick, who I'll be meeting in the coming weeks. It's a great family business, serves lots of constituents of mine. He was very vocal on LinkedIn. I won't repeat everything he said, it's not all repeatable, but he talked about the national insurance rise and the impact that will have and the cost of the products that he's selling. I've got Rick Cressman from Nailcoat Hall, who has a great hospitality business. And hospitality, by the way, does not reflect the comments made from the opposite benches. UK hospitality businesses across the board are up in arms because the reduction in rates relief, the reduction in the threshold of national insurance, by the way, not just the increase in national insurance, the reduction in the threshold is having huge impact. And fundamentally, it means young people will not get jobs, their first jobs in hospitality, because they are the ones that suffer, because they end up being the most costly, not just in terms of salary, because it will normally be national living wage, but it will be the training cost and the time that is taken. These are real consequences of the decision that the Chancellor is taking. And so I have great amount of sadness actually when I listen to members opposite who say they listen but they don't agree, and they talk about how great their businesses are doing. I just don't believe that they are talking to those businesses because at least 99% of businesses that will be affected by this will not be happy about that. And fundamentally, the consequence of when the government came in, they had decisions to make. They could have patched the roof if this fictitious black hole is to be believed. They could fix the roof when the sun was shining. But now, when we're faced with a changing global scene, with Ukraine where it is, and Donald Trump doing what he's doing, and Putin coming to a fore, the Chancellor cannot commit to not coming back for more taxation. It is inevitable that she'll have to do that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since coming into office last July, this Labour government has launched an all-out attack on businesses in this country. An attack on 5.5 million SMEs, which represent over 99% of our business population. So small businesses in my constituency of South Northamptonshire have been front and centre in this assault. 88% of my constituency in South Northamptonshire is agricultural land. So not only are our farmers being hit by the cut to agricultural property relief and business property relief, but it's also the small businesses that sell their produce, like Barn Owl Farm Shop in Evenley and Tobury Court in Towcester. These will also be hit by these taxes. My farmers do not deserve this. They have only ever worked hard, day and night, generation after generation. Small businesses that sit on Brackley High Street, like Defirm Beauty, have told me they might have to cut their highly successful apprenticeship programmes, as the tax hikes mean they can no longer afford to keep them on. Shameful. This government is destroying small businesses and our high street. Our local pubs, of which there are over 90 in my constituency, will also be hurt by the reductions in business rates relief for hospitality businesses, another punitive tax rise at a time when many of our locals are really struggling. The Conservatives left office with one of the lowest unemployment figures in recent history. Yet after the Halloween budget, we are seeing the number of vacancies fall and growth slowing down. This is a result of the choices this government has made. A choice to give above-inflation pay rises to their union paymasters. A choice to target our farmers and destroy their life's work for 22.5 hours of NHS spending. This was not driven by a growth agenda, but a socialist ideology. And it's also a choice to change business property relief and destroy our local pubs. Instead, they're hiking taxes, and it is the working people across this country, the working people they promised to protect, that will pay the ultimate price. Madam Deputy Speaker, Labour isn't working.
I call Gregory Stafford.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today's debate on the disastrous impact of the Labour government's policies that are having on my constituency of Farnham and Borden, which includes Haslemere, Liphook and the surrounding villages, is timely. My inbox is filled with complaints and concerns from small family businesses about the impact. Small and family businesses are not just places to shop or to buy things, they are the backbone of our economy and the lifeblood of our communities. Across the United Kingdom, they provide almost 14 million jobs and contribute an amazing £575 billion to our economy. Yet under this Labour government, these businesses are under siege. Labour simply does not understand business. It sees businesses as nothing more than a cash cow to fund its endless state expansion. For For nearly a century, my grandparents and my great-grandparents before them dedicated their lives to Stafford's shop in Haslemere, and they would be horrified to see this government's full-scale assault on family businesses. This family business tax, Labour's reckless cap on business property relief, will decimate family-run enterprises, breaking them apart when they should be passed down to the next generation. In the Surrey side of my constituency, we are fortunate to have two thriving market towns, Farnham and Haslemere, which are hubs of entrepreneurialism and independent enterprise. Businesses such as Hamilton's Tea Room, Borelli's Wine Bar, Farnham Homes, Kilnside Farm Shop and Elphick's, one of the last remaining British family-owned department stores, they have been the cornerstones of our high streets for generations. Similarly, in Haslemere is home to our Miles and Sons, Good Horse Saddlery and David's Menswear. Together, these 8 businesses alone have had a presence on our high streets for a total of 439 years. Given that the Family Business UK has warned that these policies would cost 125,000 jobs, will the government reconsider its stance before it is too late for these businesses? Meanwhile, on the East Hampshire side of my constituency, World Choice in Liphook has been a family-run travel agency since 1971, and Hogmore Distillery, though newer, is an outstanding artisan gin and liquor company based in the heart of the former military town of Borden. These businesses, like so many across the country, are already being squeezed by Labour's misguided economics policies, with increased business rates and tax burdens making it harder to survive. But where Labour misunderstands business, it actively despises the countryside. This government is rurally illiterate. It does not care about rural jobs, rural businesses, or our rural communities. The family farm tax, Labour's assault on agricultural property relief, is a direct attack on farming families who've worked the land for generations. Bob and Ros Milton of Kilnside Farm, who expanded their business with a farm shop under the support of the previous government, now face closure due to these rising costs. Similarly, Matthias Nursery had hoped to pass their business to the next generation, but now fears this will be impossible. And likewise, my campaign for local pubs and heritage clubs has seen me do a pub crawl across the constituency. I've currently visited 17 of the 56 pubs. Everything must be done in moderation, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I've had invaluable conversations with landlords. Carl from the Nelson pub in Farnham highlighted the importance of zero-hour contracts for his employees, including a staff member who also works as a paramedic and relies on the flexibility that these contracts employ. Yet, Labour's Employment Rights Bill, which bans them, is going to impose a £150 cost on his business. Yes, I will give way.
Grateful to him for giving way. I mean, we acknowledge that what the bill actually says is that no one should be forced onto a 0 hours contract. It is not the case that someone who wants that flexibility will be denied it.
Well, I thank the honourable member for intervening, and I understand that he's gone through line by line. But the reality is these businesses who are reporting to me and who apparently also speak to him are seriously concerned about this. And I take him to our villages, including Churt, Tilford, Passfield and Headley Down, where the village shop and the pub are the heart and soul of our tight-knit communities. But Labour is simply making them harder to survive. Madam Deputy Speaker, I ask this government, why is the government, which is supposedly focused on growth, causing businesses in my constituency to downsize, to sell up and to move out? These policies are not just misguided, they are ideological. Labour's hatred of business and the contempt for the countryside are now enshrined in policy. Since their election, the government has accepted £5.6 million in donations from trade unions, and it is no wonder then that their policies prioritise union interests over business interests. The business secretary apparently met with trade unions every 3 days in the first 3 months in charge, yet where is the same access for small businesses? Conservatives believe businesses are the engines of growth. To grow our economy, we must create jobs, drive innovation and foster prosperity. That is why we are calling for the reversal of Labour's family farm tax, their crippling jobs tax and the reduction in business rates release. When will the government acknowledge that its policies are driving up the cost of living, not reducing it? While this Labour government continues its war on businesses and the countryside, I would like to finish by extending my deepest thanks to the incredible businesses across Farnham, Haslemere, Liphook and Borden that truly are at the heart of our community's social and economic fabric. The Conservative Party will always stand up for family businesses, for farmers and for our rural communities to ensure that they can thrive, create jobs and, especially important, pass on their legacies to future generations.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And as we all know, family businesses are the very backbone of our local economy. They are the job creators, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, those that drive the local economy right in every heart of all of our communities. They employ 14 million people. They contribute 575 billion to the economy. And rightly, there has been, through the contributions made on this side of the House, much concern made about the government's budget that was announced in October last year. And rightly, Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Shadow Farming Minister, there has been much noise made about the implications of the family farm tax. But I want to use an opportunity in this debate to focus around the implications of specifically business property relief. Because I heard from the Minister at the dispatch box earlier on talk about the mechanisms of which they have calculated the impact that business property relief will have. And I want to specifically question how that Minister, indeed the Treasury, has arrived at those decisions. And I note that that Minister is not even here to listen to the points that I want to make. So I hope that this Minister will specifically address these, because the Treasury have calculated that APR and BPR changes will bring in a contribution of around £500 million to the Treasury. But yet, it seems to me, despite the challenges that I and I know others have raised to the Minister and the Treasury, that there has been no economic impact assessment that has been provided as a result of these changes. And I want to specifically understand, has there been any specific detail that has been looked at around business property relief and those wider implications that it will have onto many of our family businesses? Because, Madam Deputy Speaker, only last week I met with Richard Prudhoe, who runs Fiberline in Keighley, who employs 250 people in Keighley. And he has contributed that the implications, the negative implications of business property relief on his business, which is completely owned by him and his family, will be catastrophic. And if something happened to him, the dire consequences of tax that will be released, that will be implemented to his wider family, will be catastrophic, putting at risk potentially 250 people that are employed within Keighley. Now, I will give way briefly.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. Would he agree with me that it would be helpful if the Minister, in his closing remarks, could give assurances that the Government is willing to meet with Family Business UK, who is conducting its own survey of the impact of APR and BPR changes on businesses?
Yeah, and I absolutely would wish that the government would listen to the many concerns that consistently get raised, not only by Family Business UK, who are doing an excellent job in the amount of data that they seem to be providing to the Treasury, but yet nobody in the Treasury seems to be listening. Indeed, the Chancellor just last week did not even have the courtesy to turn up to listen to many of our farming organisations, and yet is not even giving the wider family business stakeholders the courtesy of listening to them. And the point being here is that the associated implications of business property relief is going to have dire consequences on those businesses that are wanting to invest, that are wanting to employ local people, are now having to make the same challenges that the wider farming businesses are needing to make about how they can pay a potential IHT liability that comes down the line, because they could only look at either disposing shareholding within their business. Many of them, they don't want to do that, because why would they want to sell out to a larger corporate? They want to keep their family business, indeed, within the wider family organisation. Or they sell plant and machinery, which only then negatively impacts the productivity of their business. This is something I believe that the Treasury are not looking at, because those businesses are saying to me, what is the point? Why would I want to invest not only my time and energy in growing that business, but it is going to have negative implications on the wider family structure, the wider people that we are employing within that business. So this is a budget that is hostile to our family businesses. It is going to have hugely detrimental impact on our family businesses, and Family Business UK have already said in the data that they have presented to the government that these changes are likely to result in a gross added value loss of 9.4 billion and the potential loss of 125,000 full-time employment equivalent jobs during the period of April 26 up until April 2030 alone. And I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Does he agree with me that what we're discussing demonstrates quite a perverse contradiction in that the sums we're talking about are huge, as he describes catastrophic for the businesses involved, but the overall net receipt to the Exchequer in the grand scheme of the government budget is so small, and that itself is further testament to the government's lack of economic and political nous.
Absolutely. So, and my right honourable friend makes the excellent point that the revenue in which this is likely to come into the Treasury, although I challenge the Treasury's figures, is only 500 million, but yet the catastrophic impact that this will have on many of our family businesses is huge, including those in the hospitality sector, the manufacturing, engineering and tech-based businesses in my constituency of Keighley and Ilkley. And therefore, ultimately, this government needs to listen to the concerns that have been made around business property relief, because they undermine stability and growth of those family businesses that are owned by many in our constituents. The government needs to rethink this policy, axe it, as we are calling from, because the Conservatives have been very clear that not only will we reverse the changes to agricultural property relief, but we will put in 100% relief back into business property relief, providing the certainty for many family businesses. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are many other challenges that have been brought forward by the budget. Employers' national insurance increase, which is impacting many of our family businesses, not least high energy. One of the gyms in my constituency of Keighley, who is openly saying to me that they have calculated that their employers' national insurance bill, coupled with the challenges of the business rate bill likely to increase down the line, is going to have catastrophic consequences on their business. Their overheads are going to increase, but they are not going to be able to increase their gym membership to keep their business competitive amongst the many other gym organisations across Keighley. This is the same narrative that is being reiterated by all of our family businesses. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, for our family businesses, the budget was yet another instance of Labour doing the same thing and yet saying one thing but yet doing another. They claim to be pro-growth, but yet they directly tax employment. They claim to be pro-business, but yet they tax wealth creators and family firms. Madam Deputy Speaker, growth cannot be magicked up out of the thin air as the government stipulates. So this government is on the side, this party is on the side of family businesses, and I'm pleased to support the motion today.
Graham Ledbetter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Director of the Family Business UK, Steve Rigby, has said that the single most important issue to the family businesses we represent has been the retention of business property relief. That is something that's come through loud and clear to me in recent weeks when I've been speaking with local businesses individually, collectively with organisations like the Cairngorms Business Partnership, with local Chamber of Commerce and other businesses who have come together like I've never seen them come together before, family businesses that do not normally lobby their MPs, that normally just get on with being a hard-working and productive family business, but they've come together to lobby because they are so concerned about the impact of BPR. To give a flavour of the family businesses in my constituency, in Murray West and Strathspey, we have some of the most iconic family businesses in the UK. We've got Baxter's, who many will know for their food products. Walker's, also food products. You'll find them in any airport in the world pretty much. We've got Glenfiddich, which is owned by William Grant and Sons, a family business again. And Johnson's of Elgin, who are producing some of the finest cashmere products in the world. And in Scotland as a whole, they alone employ 1,000 people. These businesses are not small fry. They are putting huge amounts of money, huge amounts of investment into those businesses every single year. Collectively, I met a group of business owners last week who collectively represented 2,500 years of business ownership. That is a phenomenal story that they have to tell. But what is incredible about them is the stewardship of those businesses. They invest their time and energy. The family members get trained up in the business. They work in all aspects of the business, ready to take on the mantle of running that business as they, as it comes to them later in life. If that business was an LLP, they would have, and you got rid of the business management of that business, they wouldn't have any kind of inheritance tax to pay. Yet because they're a family business, businesses operating on that scale and the likely tax bill that they will be hit with, the only choice they will have will be to either have put away millions of pounds to cover a tax bill, which means they're not investing, or that they will pick up or that they'll end up having to sell off large parts of the business. And for manufacturing businesses, there's a very big chance that will end up not in the UK, it'll end up abroad. It'll be bought up by a multinational or a conglomerate, and the jobs will just be shipped abroad. That is not the way to grow the economy. The official opposition's motion today, I have to say that the first couple of bits of it I was okay with. I think as the official opposition they would have been better to have a laser-like focus on inheritance tax and on national insurance contributions, but the inclusion of trying to stop a workers' rights bill is frankly ridiculous. As for the adding in the beer measures into it, it seems like somebody's been on some kind of heady brew before to come up with that motion. It makes it unsupportable. But I hope the Minister is listening about those aspects of the motion that I do have that I do support and have concerns about. Absolutely.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. Of course, in Scotland, businesses are also battling with the business rates relief not being passed on in full by the SNP Scottish Government. Will the member be putting pressure on his party in Scotland to pass on these reliefs in full to help family businesses and businesses across our high streets in Scotland?
I hear what the Honourable Member is saying. There are a number of reliefs in Scotland and Scotland went further and quicker than they did in government when it came to the small business bonus scheme that was in place. So I'm not going to take any lessons about what we do with business rates. It's a different system. There are other things going on that make it make the mix different. And it's not the issue that businesses are raising with me. The first and foremost issue, as has been indicated by Family Business UK, is inheritance tax. That is what is causing the most consternation. The businesses that I met last week, they were already saying that their financial advisors, their finance directors, if they're big enough to have them, they are already advising them to set aside substantial amounts of money to cover off risk. These are businesses that have never had to value themselves in their life. You know, they're family businesses that work on a model of working with what you have and you get on with it. They've never had to place a value of inheritance on the business. And that's yet another headache for them, another bureaucratic maze for them to work their way through that doesn't apply to LLPs. It's just it's a very unfair situation, and I don't understand why a Labour government in particular is tackling family-owned businesses in that way and allowing shareholder-owned businesses or LLPs off the hook. That doesn't make sense to me. The Honourable Member for St Albans spoke very well on our, and had that amendment been taken, I would certainly have gone for it. But, and I'm sorry that I can't,
I call Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
And it is an honour to rise today to speak on behalf of the very many family businesses in Kings Swinford and South Staffordshire, because family businesses are at the heart of our local communities, as well as the heart of our local economies. They provide employment for nearly 14 million people, contributing £575 billion to the economy, and are founded on solid principles of entrepreneurism and self-responsibility. I am proud to represent so many fantastic family businesses, ranging from heavy engineering firms in the Black Country to vineyards in Pattingham and Halfpenny Green. They work tirelessly to build and sustain their businesses, creating jobs and prosperity. They offer excellent products and services to customers near and far, and they look forward to their children one day continuing in their footsteps. But their job is being made much harder by Labour's family business tax, a barrage of burdensome red tape, a trade union charter, a family business surcharge and the national insurance jobs tax, which together mean that businesses will pay more in tax and compliance rather than in growth or jobs. And as has been said before, it is the cumulative impact of all of these measures that is so damaging. Now, I'm not going to pretend that most of the family businesses I speak to are absolutely delighted by the increase in the national living wage, any more than they were delighted the previous year when the previous government increased it by a higher amount, but they recognise that wage increases for their staff was actually the right thing to do. But where they do have a problem is when those additional wage costs are compounded by payroll taxes in the form of the national insurance contributions, which hit particularly hard those sectors that rely particularly on part-time workers, which are suddenly facing enormous increases. And that's then compounded further by business rate rises for those in retail and hospitality, who are suddenly finding that their business rate bills nearly doubling in April compared to what they've paid for the last few years. And then also coming in April, that flurry of additional regulations. And somehow, if they somehow survive all of this, if they thrive, they develop their businesses, they find that they can no longer be expect to be able to leave the business intact for their family, for the future generations of their family to run. Now, the Confederation of British Industry and Family Business UK have warned that Labour's changes to business property relief could lead to 125,000 job losses and reduce economic output by £9.4 billion. Businesses that have survived economic downturns, global recessions, war on our continent and a worldwide pandemic now face the prospect of being brought to their knees by a tax policy that will force them to break up their businesses when the current owners pass away. This is not just a policy change, it's an existential threat. Now, the Black Country is a region with a proud history of manufacturing and enterprise. We've always been a place of hard work and innovation and community. And in South Staffordshire, my constituents are proud of their thriving rural economy, built on countless family businesses. Our businesses have not just created to our local economy, they've helped to build the United Kingdom. And the idea that a tax change could strip away the future of our local businesses is nothing short of a tragedy. Fairness would be recognising that family businesses are not just economic units. They're part of the fabric of our communities, supporting local charities, providing apprenticeships, creating jobs for those who need them. But if these proposals continue to go forward, we risk losing these businesses, and with them, the local jobs they provide. I've spoken with many family businesses in my constituency, family-owned businesses that have been operating in the community for generations. They are fearful, they are uncertain, and they are already having to make decisions about their businesses and about their employees because of the Chancellor's damaging budget. And sadly, some are being forced out of business because of these measures. The government's blinkered view that seems to see business as little more than a source of revenue to offset their spending plans is wrong. I urge the government to listen to the concerns of these family firms in Kingsford and South Staffordshire and across the country who will be directly impacted by these changes. These proposals must be scrapped.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm proud to represent a constituency with so many fantastic small businesses, and those in Broxbourne are likely to be small business employers more than the national average. Entrepreneurs in the towns and villages I represent are working hard, taking risks, day in, day out, growing our local economy and creating jobs. Last month, I was told by a government minister who stood at the dispatch box that I was sort of right when private business create growth. Well, let me gently tell the government, it is not the government that creates economic growth in this country. It is all of the thousands of business owners across the country, outside of this place, that work hard day in, day out, creating jobs right across the country, investing in their companies and investing in their supply chains. And we have listened to the debate from across the House, and we've had some good speeches from this side of the chamber about how it is business that create economic growth and not government. And it was sort of alluded to by a Labour MP whose constituency escapes me, that the national insurance increase of £25 billion, the employment regulation of £5 billion, doesn't really matter to family businesses because they're quite small and they don't employ many people. Well, that is no way to treat family businesses in this country. We should be saying to family businesses in this country, the sky is the limit. We should be saying, invest in your business, grow that business, we'll help you, we'll support you, we'll create the right environment for you to take those risks, because it is a massive risk when you put your life savings, you put blood, sweat and tears into the business that you want to grow, particularly from your home when you're starting a new business. And it is an incredible risk to say, do you know what, I'm going to take that jump. I'm going to make an offer to someone, I'm going to employ my first employee. We should be creating the environment to be able to people to be able to do that. Because the more of them we have, the more family businesses that upskill, that create local jobs, that invest in their business, the more money the Treasury gets. So the more money we can spend on our public services. We should not be hampering businesses. So I think that was a ludicrous point from one of the members opposite.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
My honourable friend is making a very powerful point. I think the allied point is, having listened to most of this debate, is that whilst Labour members opposite seem to give justification as to why they need to raise these taxes, which I entirely, like him, disagree with, we've not had a single word from them about what impact these tax rises are going to have on family farms, family businesses and employers.
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and when I go out and speak to farmers, as he does in his constituency and I do in mine, and small business owners, I haven't met one that thinks the government's on the right path. So I don't know who Labour members go out to and speak to in their constituencies, because, well, I hear from a secondary position that it's trade unions, and that is probably correct, because when I go out and speak to businesses and farmers in my constituency, they think the government has sold them down the river, led them up the garden path, and is completely doing things that they did not think they were going to do when they were going to get into power. And we haven't heard from the government what it is doing to support businesses and to support family businesses. Now, what it could have said, and I hope that... I will give way.
I thank him for giving way. He's speaking for it with great passion about his constituency, and I do understand some of the concerns that he's raised. But he asks what the current government's doing. You know, apart from all the money we're putting into the NHS, and apart from all the money that's going into education, apart from that, what are we doing? He earlier gave the example of a single person running a business about to employ their first person, which is a big step for any business, I accept that. But is it not the case for those really small businesses? They're actually going to be paying less national insurance tax now after this budget. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. When I go out and speak to businesses in my constituency, they are putting off investing, they are putting off employing local people because of the jobs tax his government is introducing and because of the new regulation his government is again introducing. Now, we haven't heard from the government, and I hope when the minister winds up, they can actually say about what we're going to do to create the next generation of entrepreneurs. Now, we could turbocharge the education system. Now, we've got lots of fantastic teachers in my constituency and across the country that do a sterling job for the young people in this country. Now, what we could say is we could say to people that have created businesses, well, if you go back to your secondary school, we'll give you some money off your tax bill if you go and teach, and not from a textbook, from real life experience about how to create growth, how to create jobs, how to create a business, and really infuse those students to how to create their own businesses, because you haven't got to go to a maths class to understand maths, but you could have someone come in that's run a business and say, right, we've got to do your accounts now, you've got to see how much you're going to pay people, you've got to see how much tax you're going to pay. You can get people from the creative industries to say, right, now you've got to design your logo. How are you going to do that? Design your TV advertisement from for your product, what you're going to sell, what you're going to be able to go out there and do. We could be doing that. We could be thinking outside the box. And I haven't heard what support the government is giving to creating the next generation of entrepreneurs. Because if we don't unlock their aspiration and we don't continue to allow people in this country to take those risks and invest in their ideas, there will be no taxes coming in. There will be no money for public services. Absolutely. We must do this, and we must do it more regularly. So I hope when the government minister gets to the dispatch box, when he does his summary, that he actually tells the House how he is going to unlock the next generation of entrepreneurs, how we are going to support people to take those risks. And as I said, it is a massive risk. But this is why the government's rhetoric of I will give way one last time.
Does he agree with me that if young people can't get to work due to broken public transport, due to potholes or due to illness, then ultimately that will hold back the next generation of young people? And does he not agree that we are taking steps to fix those problems?
Yes. Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and he is supporting a party that is actually cutting the capital budget for transport. Yes. Now, what the government could be doing, and I've made this point time and time and again, it could be taking on the utility companies that dig up the roads endlessly, so my residents have to sit in traffic, and I expect many of our residents do from across the country, costing the taxpayer and this economy billions of pounds. If we get people to the shops quicker, if we get people to work quicker, if I get my traders, my electricians and my builders to their sites quicker to be able to do jobs, that will unlock growth. That will mean that they've got more pounds in their pocket to spend on the local high street that we need to protect. That will be that they will be able to take those risks and employ people. But I haven't heard that from the government. I haven't heard that we're going to take on utility companies. I haven't heard we're going to unlock the aspiration of the next generation in this country through our education system. So I would gently say to the honourable members opposite, you have said in your manifesto and your election campaign, we are the government of economic growth. But the reason why that is not working is because you fundamentally do not understand that it is private business in this country, it is our hard-working constituents in family businesses that create economic growth. It is not this disastrous Labour government.
Glynis Meddy.
Diolch, Dir Pryllhyfarydd. Small and medium businesses account for 99.3% of all businesses in Wales. It's not simply an economic value we measure, but the social and cultural value they create in our communities as well. These businesses employ local people, keeping wealth in their area, and are a crucial part of a thriving community. However, small businesses have been under enormous pressures for several years. The Chancellor's decision to increase employers' national insurance contribution has placed huge financial strain on small businesses, a damaging decision which will cost jobs. The cuts to business property relief will also damage local businesses in Ynys Môn. Lewis Forecourt, a family-run business for over 40 years on the island, say that this change will have huge implications for their business. As a key employer, they will be restricted in job creation and growth. In a letter they wrote to the Prime Minister, they noted that this means less investment in infrastructure at their sites. The Brexit deal pursued by the UK is particularly damaging for the Welsh businesses. Wales is more reliant on trade with Europe, with 58.6% of total goods export from Wales going to the EU, compared to 50.3% for the UK as a whole. The government must start removing these damaging trade barriers. This is a simple step in order to help struggling smaller businesses. As if this wasn't enough pressure, the Welsh Labour government continues to charge higher business rates to Welsh businesses than anywhere else in Great Britain. The recent closure of the Holyhead port for nearly 6 weeks had a significant impact on many small family businesses on Holyhead and Ynys Môn. Footfall in the town was down 40 to 60%, and in my discussions with the businesses, this is having direct impact on their sustainability. It will clearly take time for Holyhead and the surrounding area to recover from Storm Dara. The UK government must recognise the huge long-term impact of the closure of the port for business and the economy in Ynys Môn, and I call on them, yet again, to establish a hardship fund to support businesses directly affected by the closure of the port. We have wonderful business on the island. Last week, I visited Mr Holt's chocolate factory in Llangefni, a magical and delicious Welsh chocolate factory with a colourful packaging. Mr Holt is giving a boost to both the local economy and our rich culture. And today, Finneys of Benllech are competing in the National Fish and Chips Award final, and I wish them the best of luck. There are so many hard-working family businesses on Ynys Môn, but after years of neglect by government's policy, many are questioning their future. I fear this government is prioritising large corporations over the small family businesses who are the backbone of the economy in Ynys Môn. If this government wants to see growth, they must change track and prioritise our hard-working small and local family businesses.
I call Peter Fortune.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And like many members on this side of the House who have started a small business, I'd refer you to my register of interests. It's been a fascinating debate listening to stories of businesses right across the country. I was particularly moved by my honourable friend, the member for Keighley, who talked about the pressure facing a local gym. It made me feel better as I am contributing to my local gym by paying the membership fees and not using any of the facilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, 7 months ago, when Labour came to power, the new government proclaimed economic growth as its first mission. For all the doom-mongering, Labour inherited an economy that had turned a corner following the pandemic and energy crisis. It was growing. Energy bills were falling, inflation was back on target, and employment was high. But in 7 short months, economic growth has stalled. The Bank of England halved its growth forecasts. The cost of living is rising again with high inflation and energy bills, and unemployment is increasing as businesses brace for tax rises. Britain's economy is stuttering because of this government's failing policies. A family business tax to break up thriving enterprises. A jobs tax to make it more expensive for businesses to employ people. A business rate hike to squeeze the already struggling British high street, and more employment red tape to tie businesses' hands. But Labour isn't content with cutting jobs and closing businesses, Madam Deputy Speaker. They're giving ministers the power to shrink the great British pint. And whilst they say they'll never do it, who could trust a word this government says? Not pensioners, not working people, and certainly not farmers. Madam Deputy Speaker, on an issue of such vital national importance, can we take that risk? Madam Deputy Speaker, every employer I speak to in my constituency of Bromley and Biggin Hill tells me they have no choice but to cut jobs, wages and investment. That's true whether it's a nursery in Bromley Common, a large franchisee on Bromley High Street, or a charity serving our borough. This is what an anti-business government looks like, not a pro-growth one. These policies are all the more bizarre as the Prime Minister once said that wealth creation was his #1 priority. Well, the reality is he doesn't know how to create wealth, only tax it. Taxing family farmers who will be forced to sell off their land. Taxing family businesses that will be forced to sell. Taxing high street businesses that will be forced to close. And taking jobs so working people face redundancy. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not too late for Labour to spare family businesses. Family businesses which employ 14 million people and contribute £575 billion to the economy. Labour's decision to cap and cut the business property relief risks breaking up these long-running family businesses. And instead of continuing these businesses, the next generation will be forced to sell. The government's policies won't grow the economy, but hollow it out. Britain simply cannot afford Labour's assault on our nature's economic future.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This debate has been held against the absurd backdrop of a Chancellor of the Exchequer writing to government colleagues and begging regulators, desperately seeking advice on how to find economic growth. All the while, in the Energy Department, they're deindustrialising the economy. In the Home Office, they're welcoming fiscally negative immigration. And in the Business Department, they're adding more than £5 billion a year in new costs to business in a single Act of Parliament. And of course, they're whacking up taxes, like with the change to business property relief, because they broke their election promises as soon as they got into office. In their manifesto, Labour promised the country that by 28-29, they would only increase spending by £9.5 billion a year. They knew all the facts at that point, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer told the Financial Times. But just a few months later, they increased spending in their budget by £76 billion a year, 8 times more than they promised in that manifesto. This is the reason for their broken tax promises, the higher taxes, the extra borrowing, not the poor excuses offered by the Minister earlier. I will certainly give way.
I thank him for giving way. He makes the point that public spending is increasing faster than he expected. Perhaps he could outline where he thinks it should now be cut to make that good. Perhaps starting with public services in his own constituency.
The honourable gentleman is a little confused. Public spending isn't increasing faster than I expected. It's increasing faster than his party told the country. And that is the point. The Treasury might not be what it once was, but even if we believed what the Minister said about the fictional black hole, and the Office for Budget Responsibility has disowned that, £9.5 billion plus £22 billion does not even reach half of the £76 billion in extra Labour spending. I'm not sure the Minister is listening, but he can intervene if he wants to explain himself at this point. He clearly isn't. And what do we get for these extra taxes? The Home Office budget is being cut by 2.7% in real terms compared to last year. The Department for Transport budget is being cut by 2.5%, and its capital budget by 3.1%. That is economic illiteracy. This amounts to taxterity, tax rises and spending cuts to go with stagflation, stagnation and inflation. Labour economics, I will.
To be fair to the Labour government, they have seen a surplus in terms of self-assessment tax receipts at 15 billion. The problem is the OBR was expecting it to be 21 billion. Therefore, we have the prospect of having to try and find where we get that extra money from. So the other side need to set out, are they going to break their fiscal rules? Are they going to cut public spending again? Or are they going to increase taxes? Does my friend have any inclination from the other side what they might choose? Because I certainly haven't heard anything.
Well, I would say to my honourable friend, based on the track record of the party opposite, one would always bet on tax rises and not fiscal responsibility. And the bond markets have taken a single look at the Chancellor's fiscal plans and increased Britain's borrowing costs, which is another Labour tax rise for all of us. Not one word in the speeches that we've heard from the party opposite today recognises the cumulative damage caused by their government's policies. Right. The National Insurance Jobs Tax, hiking the cost of hiring staff by £900 for an employee on the average salary and costing businesses £25 billion in total. The business rates relief cut from 75% to 40%, meaning businesses will spend £2.7 billion extra a year by 26-27. The Employment Rights Bill, which will cost businesses, I said, £5 billion a year, and probably more once the government finally gets its impact assessments right. Normally, you get the impact assessments done before a bill is published, not after it's passed its stages in the House of Commons. Then there's the Energy Secretary, who wants to increase the carbon price, higher than Europe's, and according to the NISO report he constantly endorses, to as much as £147 per tonne of carbon dioxide by 2030. As industry is lining up to tell them, this is yet another job killer. And of course, there are the changes to business property relief, which we've discussed today, which will cost £1.25 billion in lost revenue and 125,000 jobs lost by 2030. I certainly will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Would my honourable friend agree with me that the impact of the changes to agricultural property and business property are already being felt by businesses across the country because farmers are simply having to shelve investment for fear of a huge inheritance tax bill, and this is affecting the wider rural economy because there's no new machinery coming, there are no new buildings being built. It means less tax receipts for the Treasury, fewer jobs and a poorer United Kingdom.
I absolutely agree with what my honourable friend says. So I was baffled by the speeches from the benches opposite, where MPs were lining up to say they'd been meeting local businesses who are desperate to congratulate them for the tax rises that their government is imposing on them. It is clearly ridiculous. In my own constituency of West Suffolk, I'm proud to represent so many family businesses that contribute to the economy. The Hadley Shipping Group, which is owned by James Warwick, is one of the last few remaining family-run shipping companies in Britain. The Claydon family has manufactured and exported agricultural machinery, world-class agricultural machinery, since the 1980s. The Wedge Group galvanising company in Haverhill is a leading business in hot-dip galvanising in Europe and beyond. We need these vibrant and successful family businesses to help us build again. And as my honourable friend just said, they are telling us the same thing. The choice that they are confronted by because of the policies of this government is to consider selling their business altogether, selling parts of their business, or cutting much-needed investment. And I conclude by saying that repeating the word growth in press releases and ministerial speeches and tweets does not make growth magically appear. Pummelling business, as this government has, is the fastest route to killing growth and our prosperity.
I call Shadow Minister Andrew Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When he was seeking their votes last summer, the Prime Minister said small businesses are the lifeblood of our communities. He said business is the beating heart of our economy. He told small business owners in Southampton that Labour will deliver the stability business need to thrive. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Business Secretary have all looked businesses in the eye and said they had their back. But at the very first opportunity, Labour have unleashed the biggest attack on business for a generation. They gave their union paymasters a blank cheque to craft an employment bill that will make it impossible for business to grow. They gave us the jobs tax, the family business death tax, and business rate hikes up and down the high street. Business owners across this country are enduring a horror show reminiscent of the darkest days of the 1970s. It's no wonder how we got here. Not one single person sat around the cabinet table has serious experience of business. They don't understand what it means to take the risks that create growth. They don't understand the responsibility business owners take on when they decide to employ people, what it's like to worry day and night if you can make payroll at the end of next month. Madam Deputy Speaker, they just don't get it. Today on our side of the House, we have seen some excellent contributions of my colleagues who do get it, who do understand what it takes. The Honourable Member for Beaconsfield reminded us that it's businesses that create jobs, not warm words from the government. The Honourable Member for Bromsgrove told us how government is in denial, and we saw that again and again today, about the impact of the changes, the choices they've made, and the tax increases. The Right Honourable Member for Tatton reminded us that family businesses are the breeding grounds of entrepreneurs, how right that is. My friend for Dumfries and Galloway reminded us that when it comes to business, yes, Britain's got talent. Businesses provide so many people, including myself, with their all-important first job. And businesses are being crushed by what my right honourable friend for Hinckley and Bosworth rightly called today's toxic concoction of changes. The honourable member for Bridgwater, who reminded us he's a former and fully qualified solicitor, of the devastating impact of the employment bill which he's studied. My friend for Meriden and Solihull East talked to us about how family businesses are people's hopes and dreams and ambitions. The honourable member for Southall Northamptonshire reminded us that right now businesses are cutting apprenticeships, pubs are closing, high streets are damaging, and reminding us that once again Labour isn't working. My friend and neighbour, the honourable member for Farnham and Boredom, reminded us how Labour sees business as nothing more than a cash cow to fund their spending sprees. And the honourable member for Keighley and Ilkley talked about how growth cannot be magicked out of thin air, however much this government tries. Family businesses sounded on solid principles and self-reliance. The honourable member for Kings Winford and South Staffordshire brought his experience of business to bear to this debate. It's not government that creates, but business owners working hard day in, day out. And the member for Bromley and Biggin Hill reminded us how just 7 short months in, the Bank of England is halving growth forecasts, the cost of living is rising, unemployment is going up, all on this watch. And finally, the member for West Suffolk reminded us why we're really here today. We're here today because Labour broke their election promises. They've increased spending to £76 billion a year, 8 times what was in their manifesto, and it's business that are paying the price. Business is not an abstraction. These are our pubs, our cafes, our restaurants and bars, our clothes shops, our newsagents. They are very real, and they're in very real danger. For many of them, the choices the government have made will be terminal. The British Retail Consortium, the British Chamber of Commerce, UK Hospitality, the Federation of Small Business, Family Business UK are all ringing the alarm bells, but this government is not listening. And we've heard that across this House, including from the other parties here today. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has said that Labour's job tax will hit the lowest paid the hardest, as firms are forced to make the very toughest of decisions to survive. And for what end? To fund pay rises for train drivers, to give away the Chagos Islands, to finance Red Ed's mad windmill obsession. Yesterday, the Conservatives successfully amended, I won't give way, we're under time, in the other place, the National Insurance Bill to mitigate the worst of Labour's job tax. Will the Minister, in winding up, confirm that they will respect that amendment to exempt hospices, care providers, GPs, pharmacies, small charities and send providers from the worst ravages of Labour's job tax? And let me be entirely clear, for the benefit of every one of our constituents in this House, these are choices Labour have made, and they are not choices that will lead to growth. One archetypal small business are our family-owned pubs, and we can all think of a family-owned pub we've come to love. Thousands of them will fall victim to this government's anti-business agenda. Not to mention the government's tax on the staff behind the bar, a bill to ban banter, a threat to end even those cheeky cigarettes outside, and even a power, yes, a power, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the Business Secretary to shrink the size of the British pint. The government are giving themselves unchecked powers which could see the Great British Pint vanquished as part of their Trojan horse EU surrender product regulation bill. The member for Ealing North, who's returned to his place, say that they have no plans to ban the pint. But if that is the case, then will they support our Amendment 38 that will save the pint? Very briefly.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. He was in the chamber when I spoke earlier. Does he not agree with me that it's the Weights and Measures Bill that protects our pint, and we should not be scaremongering that our pint is anywhere at risk?
No. Well, I deeply regret that, Madam Deputy Speaker. If the honourable lady has read the bill, she will find that it precisely confers those powers on the Secretary of State, but she can join with our benches in the other place by supporting the amendment, and the government can make clear today whether this is scaremongering or whether we should all be deeply concerned about, by backing the amendment and removing that live risk to the British pound. Yeah. Madam, they can back the amendment any time they want. Madam Deputy Speaker, the bravery, I'll be kind, the bravery of those sat opposite is impressive. Every single one of them will have to look at their constituency business owners in the eye. Every single one of them will have to face constituents as they lose their livelihoods. The choices this government has made will put thousands of employers in the red and some out of business for good. Hundreds of thousands of jobs will be lost. And so for just 1 second, I ask the Labour members opposite to put themselves in the position of an employer telling their long-standing staff they can no longer afford to keep them on. Those opposite don't understand business. Their interests are with their union paymasters, not with the workers who will lose their jobs. They are petrified of celebrating success and supporting wealth creators. This is a government that is taking business for granted. It is devastating our economy, and we will all pay the price.
Minister Gareth Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I start by thanking honourable members on all sides of this House for their contributions to what has been an interesting debate. We heard in particular excellent contributions from my honourable friends for the Vale of Glamorgan, for Gateshead, for Birmingham Northfield, for Ealing Southall, for Hexham and Clwyd West. And we also heard interesting contributions from the Honourable Lady for St Albans and her colleague from Tunbridge Wells, from honourable members from Beaconsfield, Bromsgrove, Tatton, Dumfries and Galloway, Bridgwater, Meriden, South Northamptonshire, Farnham and Stafford, Keighley and Ilkley, West Suffolk, Bromley and Biggin Hill, Broxbourne, Kingswood and South Staffordshire, and indeed 2 from the Honourable Member for Moray, West Nairn and Strathspey, and the Honourable Lady for Unners Mon. My honourable friend, in his opening remarks, underlined that we are taking the tough decisions now to support family businesses. We recognise absolutely that they are the backbone of both our economy, our communities and indeed our society too. And unlike the party opposite who crashed the economy, we are determined to champion family business. While the Shadow Chancellor was sitting around the Cabinet table, the cost of loans to family businesses were going through the roof. He was part of a Cabinet that left this government with a huge £22 billion black hole in the public finances. And it's always interesting to listen to the Shadow Secretary of State for Business, who never seems to mention anymore that he was once in the Treasury helping to write the Liz Truss budget. Any time he wants to intervene at the dispatch box and apologise for his record in helping to write the Liz Truss budget, he will always find me willing to let him intervene. And then he finished off his time in government as a business minister when record numbers of family businesses went bust. We know that there are just over 5 million family businesses in the UK.
I am interested, and my constituents will be very interested to hear what the Minister's saying. Minister.
We know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are over 5 million family businesses in the UK, the vast majority of them small businesses. And for the first time for a decade and more, we are determined to place small businesses front and centre of the government's plan to kick-start the economy. In just our first almost 8 months, we have already taken significant steps to begin to reverse the decline of the last 14 years, all of which will help create a stronger business environment for family businesses to grow and develop. An investment summit that raised £63 billion, creating 38,000 jobs. Starting our programme to build 1.5 million new homes. Kick-starting Great British Energy to bring fuel bills down. Major reforms to the planning system. Record research and development spending. Significant investment in new infrastructure. And the budget saw too over £1 billion announced over the next 2 years for the British Business Bank, with more funding for our start-up loans and the Growth Guarantee Scheme. Precious capital to help entrepreneurs to take ideas from design to development, to build the next generation of family businesses. Give way.
So for giving way, I'm not quite sure if the Minister himself believes what he's reading, but could the Minister confirm whether or not any economic impact assessment has been done of the collective impact that all of the budget changes are going to have to many of our family businesses, including reducing the relief on APR and BPR?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for mentioning the reliefs on APR and BPR, and I will come to them in due course. At the same time, the budget set out practical support for small businesses, especially those on the high street. Many family businesses affected by shoplifting. No one should underestimate the scale of the problems that we inherited there. Out-of-control shoplifting has plagued family businesses and businesses generally for years, with both staff and store owners feeling powerless and police forces cut to the bone under the last government, inadequately resourced to properly respond. Just yesterday in the crime bill, the Home Secretary confirmed that we're tackling this issue head-on by scrapping the effective immunity for low-value shoplifting, helping family businesses, indeed helping all family businesses. And at that budget too, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, also announced additional funding to crack down on the organised gangs who target retailers. Give way.
Thank you. Would the Minister agree with my experience as somebody who my entire working life has been self-employed within my family business, established by my dad and uncle in 1975? Would he agree with my experience that the family businesses do not operate in isolation and lots of things matter to family businesses? So if you're ill in the morning, you cannot join the 8 a.m. merry-go-round for a GP appointment and the state that the Tories have left this country in. You've got to get to work, you've got to open up, you've got to get people through the door. If the buses don't work, your staff don't get in. If potholes aren't fixed, would the Minister agree?
Order, Minister.
I do agree with my honourable friend. In the budget, as he rightly alludes to, we did have to take tough decisions to fix the foundations of our economy, to restore stability and begin to rebuild the crumbling infrastructure that my honourable friend alluded to and the terrible state of our public services. And while we have raised national insurance employer contributions, we have mitigated the impacts by increasing the employment allowance to £10,500, a record amount. It means 1 million small businesses will either be paying the same or less national insurance contributions than they do now. Several honourable members rightly pointed out in this debate a lot of family businesses are high street businesses. Many of them have been run for successive generations. They're part and parcel of our communities. The party opposite did next to nothing to help family businesses on Britain's high street. They allowed thousands of bank branches to close, thousands of pubs and other high street family businesses to close too. That's why this government is focused on its 5-point plan to breathe life back into Britain's high street. I do wait to my honourable friend.
I thank the Minister for giving way. As he knows, the Nationwide Catering Association, which represents small independent and family-run street food businesses, is based in Kings Norton in my constituency, and I thank him for the recent and positive meeting that we held. Was it not the case that one of the problems they faced was under a previous government, they struggled to get a seat around the table?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, my honourable friend, I was pleased to see my honourable friend and the business organisation that he brought in to see us, and I hope to have the opportunity to come to his constituency to see very directly what we discussed in action at that meeting. Our 5-point plan to breathe life back into Britain's high streets, as well as addressing antisocial behaviour and retail crime, means reforming the business rate system, It means working with the banking industry to roll out banking hubs. It means stamping out late payments and empowering communities to make the most of vacant properties. We are already delivering in all these areas. And to further support high street family businesses and other SMEs. In particular, we've frozen the small business multiplier and extended business rates relief for the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors. We are permanently reducing tax on properties for these businesses too. One of the many reasons, Madam Deputy Speaker, why the party opposite lost the confidence of British business is because, despite promising many times to reform business rates, they never did. We are determined to do so. Even at this late stage, though, and I hope the House could join me in this comment, I hope even at this late stage, the Scottish Government will agree to cut business rates for retail, hospitality and leisure sector in Scotland, echoing what we are doing here. Honourable members will also know that since Christmas, high street rental auctions have allowed councils to tackle persistently vacant properties by putting leases up for auction. This right to rent for businesses is paving the way for further regeneration and growth, for new family businesses to emerge and for current family businesses on the high street to benefit from the extra footfall. We're also determined to tackle the scourge of late payments. Over 50% of small businesses have reported problems with late payments. After years of tough talk and little action from the opposition, we have already taken decisive steps to protect family businesses in this regard. Already announced measures to tackle late payments and contracts with long payment terms so that small firms aren't waiting months on end for big firms to pay up. We'll be bringing forward secondary legislation in this parliamentary session to make further changes, and we'll be launching a public consultation shortly on potential primary legislation measures that go further still to tackle this problem. And to further help family businesses, we are creating a new business growth service, bringing together over time under one national banner a whole array of business support services throughout the UK. But we're not stopping there, Madam Deputy Speaker. Later this year, we'll be launching our small business strategy. From boosting scale-ups to regenerating the high speed, supporting the adoption of new digital technologies, further addressing the access to finance challenges that business face, this small business paper will set out the government's vision for all small businesses, including the vast majority of small businesses too. We've set out a whole series of measures to tackle the situation facing family businesses in this country. In his opening remarks, remarkably perhaps, the Right Honourable Member, the Shadow Chancellor, failed to acknowledge that according to the very latest PwC Chief Executive Survey, the UK is the second best place in the world to invest, behind only the US. He failed to mention that the IMF and OECD both predict that Britain will be Europe's fastest growing G7 economy in the coming years. And he omitted the fact that the UK was the only G7 economy, other than the US, to have our growth forecast upgraded last month by the IMF, who credited the decisions we made in this budget. That's the kind of change the British people voted for at the last general election. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is still a lot more to do, and we on these benches are determined to get on with the task.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Ashley Fox and James Wilde. Tellers for the noes, Kate Dearden, Martin McCluskey.
Order, order.
The ayes to the right, 108. The noes to the left, 313.
The ayes to the right were 108. The noes to the left, 313. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock.